In this video, we're going to be breaking down the worst moments of every single character in Family Guy. Grab a snack and let's get started. You're sitting at home, minding your own business, when you discover a small lump on your chest. What's your first move? Schedule a doctor's appointment? Maybe do some research online? Well, if you're Peter Griffin from Death is a Bitch, Season 2, Episode 6, your immediate reaction is to assume you're literally dying of cancer and start planning your own funeral. This isn't just regular hypochondria we're talking about. Peter goes completely nuclear. He's selling family heirlooms, delivering tear-jerking goodbye speeches to his goldfish, and essentially putting teenage Chris in charge of the entire household. Lois is standing there watching her husband have a complete existential breakdown over what could be absolutely nothing, begging him to just see a medical professional before he donates their furniture to charity. When Peter finally drags himself to the doctor's office, the diagnosis is hilariously anticlimactic. That terrifying lump that had him rewriting his will? It's a fatty corpuscle. Basically, it's just a harmless chunk of fat sitting under his skin. The doctor delivers the news with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. "You're perfectly healthy, Mr. Griffin." And for about 30 seconds, Peter experiences pure relief. Then he sees the medical bill. Now, here's where most rational humans would either pay the bill, set up a payment plan, or at least call their insurance company. But Peter Griffin's brain operates on a completely different wavelength. He stares at this bill, and somehow his thought process goes, dead people don't receive medical bills, right? So if I'm officially dead, I don't owe anything. The execution of this brilliant plan is even more ridiculous than the concept. Peter fills out the payment form, and where it asks for his name, he writes, deceased. When the form asks about his sex, he scribbles, no thanks, I'm dead, and starts giggling like he's just outsmarted the entire healthcare industry. In Peter's mind, he's discovered the ultimate life hack. Just declare yourself dead and watch your financial problems disappear. But here's the thing about bureaucracy. It doesn't understand sarcasm or assume you're joking around. When you tell your HMO that Peter Griffin is deceased, that information gets processed through official channels. And apparently, the universe takes these declarations very seriously. The Griffin family is enjoying what seems like a perfectly normal turkey dinner when their doorbell rings. Lois opens the door expecting maybe a neighbor or delivery person, but instead finds herself face-to-face with death himself. Not a metaphor, not a costume, the actual Grim Reaper, complete with black robes and that iconic scythe we've all seen in movies. Death's introduction is wonderfully casual. Yeah, I got an email from your HMO saying Peter Griffin is deceased, so I'm here to collect his soul. He's treating this like a routine business call, which somehow makes it even more terrifying. This supernatural entity is literally following up on Peter's paperwork. What happens next is pure Family Guy insanity. Stewie, being the sophisticated baby genius he is, insists that Death stay for dinner. So now you've got the personification of mortality sitting at their dining room table, critiquing Lois's cooking and making small talk about his recent clients. Death compliments the gravy while casually mentioning that the last white meat he had was drier than Oscar Wilde. Peter's sitting there realizing that his clever billing scheme might have some unexpected consequences. After dinner, Death stands up and announces it's time for Peter to come with him. Peter's response is exactly what you'd expect. He runs screaming through the house while Death chases him with supernatural patience. But then something completely unexpected happens. Death trips over one of the kids' toys and sprains his ankle. Suddenly, the all-powerful force of mortality is lying on the Griffin couch, whining about needing Advil and acting like the world's most entitled houseguest. He's very specific about preferring Advil over Tylenol, which raises questions about Death's pharmaceutical preferences that I don't think anyone was prepared to contemplate. But here's where things get really wild. With Death out of commission, nobody can die, anywhere in the world. Death is temporarily disabled, which means the natural order of existence has been completely suspended. Peter figures this out pretty quickly and decides to test the boundaries of his new immortality. Some random guy bets Peter $1,000 that he won't jump off a building. Peter takes the bet, leaps off, lands perfectly fine, and collects his money like he just completed a simple dare. A news reporter, thinking this is the story of the century, literally shoots Peter in the head on live television to demonstrate humanity's newfound invincibility. Peter just brushes it off like someone flicked his ear, looking mildly annoyed at the inconvenience. Meanwhile, people everywhere are realizing they can do absolutely anything without consequences. Extreme sports become meaningless when you can't actually get hurt. The entire concept of risk has been eliminated from human existence, and chaos is starting to spread. Death, still recovering on the couch, explains to Peter that he needs to fill in temporarily. There's a plane carrying the cast of Dawson's Creek scheduled to crash during a stopover in Rhode Island, and someone needs to make sure that happens. The natural order depends on it. This puts Peter in an impossible moral position. He boards the plane, and Death calls him mid-flight with specific instructions. Just sit tight. Let the pilots make their scheduled error. Plane crashes. Everyone dies except you. Simple job. But when Peter looks around at these young actors just living their lives, he can't bring himself to just sit there and let them die. In classic Peter Griffin fashion, his attempt to prevent the disaster becomes the exact cause of the disaster. He rushes into the cockpit trying to warn the pilots about their upcoming error, but his frantic flailing and terrible explanations end up killing both pilots. Now the plane is plummeting toward Los Angeles, with nobody flying it and everyone screaming in terror. Just when it looks like Peter's good intentions have doomed everyone, actress Karen Black stands up and announces, "I can fly this plane!" This isn't random. She actually played a character who did exactly this in some 1970s disaster movie. And incredibly, she manages to land the plane safely, saving everyone on board. Back in Quahog, Death's ankle has healed enough for him to return to work. He's surprisingly chill about the whole situation, basically saying, "Close enough," and noting that people now know Death is back in business. As a parting gift, he gives Peter a Boz Scaggs album collection, which is wonderfully random, then delivers an ominous, "I'll be back really soon," before disappearing. Think about the chain of events here. Peter didn't want to pay a medical bill, so he declared himself dead on a form. This broke the fundamental concept of mortality across the entire planet, nearly caused a plane full of teen actors to crash in LA, and required a 1970s actress to save the day. All because Peter thought writing deceased on paperwork was a foolproof financial strategy. The episode perfectly captures how Peter's simplest decisions can spiral into universe-threatening catastrophes. His complete inability to think beyond the immediate moment turns a routine medical bill into a cosmic crisis that almost breaks reality itself. But if you think Peter accidentally destroying the concept of death is intense, wait until you hear what happens when his baby son decides to commit actual murder. Lois Griffin's Murder at Sea, or so we thought. Let's dive into Stewie Kills Lois from Season 6, Episode 4, and yes, that title is exactly as literal as it sounds. This isn't one of Stewie's elaborate fantasy sequences or his usual threats that never amount to anything. This time, the diabolical baby genius actually follows through on his matricidal ambitions in the most shocking way possible. The setup begins innocently enough with Lois's birthday celebration. The family's gift-giving reveals their usual dysfunction. Meg and Chris present her with Smoker's tooth polish, because apparently, that's a real product. Peter contributes a Lionel Richie album that's probably from his own collection, and then Brian swoops in with 2 luxury cruise tickets. It's a thoughtful gesture that immediately creates tension because they had agreed on a $20 spending limit. There's this awkward moment where both Peter and Brian assume they'll be Lois's cruise companion, like they're competing for the privilege of a romantic getaway. Eventually, Peter and Lois board the ship together, waving goodbye to their children from the dock. But what they don't notice is Stewie standing there with an expression that's different from his usual mischievous smirk. This time, he looks genuinely determined. Throughout the series, Stewie's been making increasingly elaborate threats against Lois's life. He sits with his teddy bear Rupert, describing these incredibly detailed torture scenarios involving bamboo splinters, hot candle wax, and medieval execution methods. Brian often jokes that these fantasies are getting disturbingly sexual, but they've always remained just that, fantasies. But Brian finally calls Stewie out on his pattern of big talk, followed by zero action. He points out that Stewie will threaten world domination all morning, then beg for apple juice, go poop, and fall asleep like any regular toddler. This observation hits Stewie like a slap in the face, because he realizes Brian is absolutely right. His daily routine has become as predictable as a sitcom rerun. Something fundamental shifts in Stewie at that moment. For the first time, he's genuinely committed to following through on his threats. While Peter's on the cruise ship, embarrassing everyone at the captain's table with inappropriate stories about abortion, classic Peter behavior, Stewie somehow manages to rent a speedboat and reach the cruise vessel. The logistics of a baby securing maritime transportation to hunt down his mother are never fully explained, but that's beside the point. One evening, Lois is alone on the deck enjoying the ocean breeze when Stewie emerges from the shadows carrying a submachine gun. His entrance is pure Bond villain theater. Lois, "Hello, mother," delivered with the kind of cold confidence that makes your blood freeze. Lois is completely bewildered. How did her baby get on this ship? Where did he get military-grade weapons? Why does he look like he's about to commit a war crime? Stewie's response is chillingly simple, something I should have done a very long time ago. Then he opens fire. Multiple shots. Lois staggers backward from the impact and tumbles over the ship's railing into the dark ocean below. Stewie watches her disappear beneath the waves, celebrates his successful assassination for exactly 3 seconds, then immediately switches to fake crying and screaming, "Mommy, Mommy," to establish his alibi. The calculated nature of this crime is what makes it so disturbing. This isn't a crime of passion or an accident. It's premeditated murder, executed with the precision of a professional hitman, carried out by a 1-year-old in a diaper. The aftermath devastates the family in ways the show rarely explores. Search and rescue teams scour the ocean for 6 days without finding any trace of Lois. Joe Swanson has to deliver the heartbreaking news that they're officially calling off the search. The family structure completely collapses without their maternal anchor. Chris handles the loss through complete denial, convincing himself that his mother is just at some fancy European health spa and will return when she's finished with her treatments. Meg, surprisingly, starts thriving without her mother's constant criticism and oversight, which is genuinely dark when you consider their relationship dynamics. Peter attempts to re-enter the dating scene with predictably disastrous results. One potential partner has terminal cancer, and he even tries to pursue his friend's wife. A full year passes with Lois presumed dead, and the family has slowly adapted to their new reality. But then the unthinkable happens. Peter becomes the prime suspect in his wife's murder. During the cruise, Peter had taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Lois immediately after publicly declaring that he wished she was dead. When Joe and Quagmire discover evidence in Peter's trash, it looks incredibly incriminating. Peter gets arrested and charged with first-degree murder, facing a potential life sentence for a crime he didn't commit. The trial becomes a complete circus that showcases everything wrong with the justice system. Lois's father claims Peter confessed to the murder and performs this bizarre courtroom reenactment using himself and an Asian sex worker as props. Chris and Meg are forced to testify about their father's drinking habits and violent tendencies. Every piece of circumstantial evidence points toward Peter's guilt. The jury deliberates and returns with a guilty verdict. Just as the judge is raising his gavel to deliver the sentence, the courtroom doors burst open. Lois walks in, alive, healthy, and completely unaware of the legal proceedings happening in her absence. The courtroom erupts in absolute chaos. Peter is instantly vindicated. The children are reunited with their presumed dead mother, and Stewie's perfect crime has just spectacularly imploded. When the authorities ask Lois if she remembers who tried to kill her, she doesn't hesitate for a second. Yes, I do. It was Stewie. For an entire year, Stewie believed he had successfully eliminated his mother and watched his father take the blame for his crime. He must have felt like the ultimate criminal mastermind, having orchestrated the perfect murder while maintaining his innocent baby facade. Then his supposedly dead victim walks into a courtroom and immediately identifies him as her attempted killer. The episode plays with our expectations in brilliant ways. The title, Stewie Kills Lois, seems straightforward, but the reality is much more complex. Stewie did shoot Lois and watch her fall into the ocean, but she survived. His perfect crime was actually a failed murder attempt, and his elaborate cover-up was completely unnecessary. This storyline represents one of Family Guy's most ambitious narrative experiments, taking a character's running gag, Stewie wanting to kill Lois, and exploring what would actually happen if he followed through. The result is surprisingly dark and emotionally complex, showing how a single act of violence can destroy multiple lives in unexpected ways. Season 12, Episode 8 brings us Life of Brian, the episode that traumatized an entire generation of Family Guy fans and proved that animated comedies can hit you right in the emotional gut when you least expect it. This isn't your typical cartoon death, where characters get flattened by anvils and pop back up in the next scene. This one was designed to hurt, and boy, did it succeed. The story opens with Brian and Stewie returning from another one of their time-traveling adventures, but this one went particularly wrong. They accidentally armed Native Americans in 1600s Jamestown with modern muskets, basically rewriting the entire course of American history. We're talking about the British never successfully colonizing North America. No United States as we know it. Complete historical chaos spreading across centuries. Somehow they managed to fix the timeline and return to their present, but Stewie is absolutely done with these near-death experiences. He's standing in his room looking at his time machine, this incredible device that represents years of work and scientific achievement, the invention that's taken them to meet Leonardo da Vinci, witness the actual Big Bang, and explore the furthest reaches of human history. Brian watches in complete shock as Stewie picks up a sledgehammer and starts systematically destroying his masterpiece. We're talking about the most sophisticated piece of technology ever created by a one-year-old, and he's smashing it to pieces with deliberate, methodical strikes. Brian is frantically trying to stop him. Dude, what are you doing? This is literally the most amazing thing you've ever built. But Stewie has made his decision. He tells Brian to sack up because it's just a machine, and he'd rather destroy it now before something truly irreversible happens during one of their adventures. Those words, before something truly irreversible happens, are going to haunt him forever, because fate is about to demonstrate that irreversible tragedies don't require time machines. With time travel no longer an option, Brian and Stewie need to find a new way to spend their time together. They head to the local dump, which apparently serves as Quahog's discount sporting goods store, and discover a pristine street hockey net that someone threw away. It's like the universe is suggesting they try something normal and safe for once. No historical paradoxes, no killer robots, just simple recreational activity. The next day is absolutely perfect for outdoor fun. Clear blue skies, warm sunshine, gentle breeze. The kind of weather that makes you grateful to be alive. Brian and Stewie are out in the street playing hockey, and for once, everything feels wonderfully ordinary. Stewie's making jokes about being just a baby and how only jerks don't let babies win games. Brian's laughing. They're both having genuine fun together. Then Brian mentions he needs to grab his knee pads from the garage. Such a small decision. Such a nothing moment. He tells Stewie to hold on for just a second while he runs inside to get proper safety equipment. It's almost ironic. He's being responsible and cautious, trying to protect himself from minor injuries. That's when everything goes catastrophically wrong in about 3 seconds. A car comes speeding down Spooner Street way too fast for a residential neighborhood. Stewie sees it approaching and screams, "Brian, look out!" But it's already too late. The vehicle slams into Brian with this sickening impact that seems to echo through your chest. Brian goes flying through the air, hits the asphalt hard, and doesn't get back up. Peter comes running out of the house demanding to know what happened, and some random driver slows down, looks at Brian's broken body lying in the street, and callously remarks, "That guy sucked," before driving away. Even by Quahog's standards of casual cruelty, that's breathtakingly heartless. Here's a family dealing with a medical emergency, and some stranger feels the need to insult the victim. The ambulance ride to the veterinary hospital is surreal in typical Family Guy fashion. Brian has to share the emergency vehicle with a chicken who refuses to acknowledge him because apparently he has ongoing beef with the entire poultry community. Even while he's dying, Brian can't catch a break from the show's ridiculous running gags. At the animal hospital, the veterinarian takes one look at Brian's condition and immediately pulls Lois aside for a private conversation. You know the situation is hopeless when medical professionals won't discuss the prognosis in front of the patient. Brian's injuries are catastrophic and beyond treatment. The doctor gently suggests that the family should go in to say their final goodbyes while they still have the chance. The hospital room scene is where Family Guy completely abandons its comedic tone and becomes genuinely heartbreaking. The entire family gathers around Brian's bed while medical monitors beep steadily in the background. Peter is absolutely falling apart, sobbing about all the activities they'll never get to do together. He mentions windsurfing specifically, saying he would have been slightly better at it, but they both would have been good. It's such a random, specific thing for Peter to focus on, but that somehow makes his grief feel more authentic. Brian can barely keep his eyes open, but he manages to look at each family member one final time. His last words are simple and perfect. "You've given me a wonderful life. I love you all." Then, the heart monitor flatlines with that long, continuous beep that means everything is over. The doctor enters to confirm what everyone already knows: Brian Griffin is dead. Even in this devastating moment, the show can't completely abandon its identity. Chris announces that he needs to go upstairs for what he calls a sad yank, which is inappropriately hilarious but also weirdly touching in its honesty about how people cope with grief. Stewie's reaction is the most complex. He immediately realizes that he could rebuild the time machine and save Brian. He could travel back and warn him about the car, or prevent them from playing hockey that day, or make any number of small changes that would prevent this tragedy. For someone with Stewie's intelligence and resources, this should be a solvable problem. But here comes the cruel twist. When Stewie contacts his plutonium supplier, a guy named Yusuf, he discovers that the specific titanium capacitors required for time travel are no longer manufactured. The one person who made them drew a casual doodle of Mohammed while talking on the phone and is now not around anymore. Without those exact components, rebuilding the time machine is impossible. Brian is gone, and there's absolutely nothing Stewie can do about it. All his genius, all his scientific knowledge, all his determination, none of it matters because he can't get the parts he needs. It's a level of helplessness that Stewie has never experienced before. The funeral service is emotionally devastating. Peter delivers a eulogy where he calls Brian not just the family dog, but his best friend and brother. His voice cracks when he talks about spending the rest of his life missing Brian. This is Peter Griffin, the guy who once had an extended fight scene with a giant chicken, being completely vulnerable and broken with grief. A month passes, and the house feels fundamentally wrong without Brian's presence. Lois catches herself automatically setting out Brian's food bowl each morning. Chris keeps getting stuck in the doggy door because there's nobody to let him in through the regular entrance. The family is trying to function normally, but there's a Brian-shaped hole in every routine and tradition they used to share. Finally, Lois suggests that maybe they should consider getting another dog. Not to replace Brian, nobody could ever do that, but just to help fill some of the emptiness that's consuming their daily lives. It's a painful acknowledgement that life has to continue somehow, even when you're missing someone irreplaceable. At the pet store, they meet Vinny, a dog with a thick New Jersey accent who looks like he could be connected to organized crime. He introduces himself as a regular guy who might fetch your stick or might bring back an iPhone that fell off a truck. When he mentions being a pussy hound, Peter gets excited until Vinny clarifies that he's 1/16th cat on his mother's side. Despite everything the family has been through, Peter actually laughs at this ridiculous explanation. It's the first genuine moment of joy he's experienced since Brian died, and it suggests that maybe, eventually, they might be able to find happiness again. Vinny moves in with the Griffins and immediately starts trying to integrate himself into their family dynamic. He offers to cook Sunday gravy for Lois, gives Chris the nickname Hat Boy, and generally acts like he's been part of their lives forever. But Stewie is having absolutely none of it. He's actively hostile toward Vinny, even attempting to give him a heart attack by reading him terrible news about Italian Americans. It's petty and cruel behavior, but it's also Stewie's way of processing his grief. He's not ready to accept that anyone could fill the role Brian played in his life, and he's taking out his anger on this innocent dog who's just trying to help. The emotional breakthrough comes when Stewie finally breaks down completely. He's been holding himself together through sheer willpower, but suddenly he's sobbing and telling Vinny that everyone else has already moved on and forgotten about Brian. But Stewie can't forget, and he doesn't want to forget. Brian wasn't just the family pet. He was Stewie's best friend, intellectual equal, and adventure companion. "You're not supposed to lose your best friend when you're 1 year old," Stewie cries, and that line hits like a physical blow. It perfectly captures the specific tragedy of a child dealing with loss, the confusion, the anger, the desperate wish that things could go back to the way they were. Vinny shares his own story about losing his previous owner, Leo, who died during a yoga class when his ball sack split in half. It's a ridiculous Family Guy death, but Vinny's pain is completely real. He tells Stewie that he could sense the family's grief when he saw them at the pet store, and maybe they were meant to find each other, two parties dealing with loss who could help each other heal. That night, instead of sleeping downstairs in the living room, Vinny chooses to sleep in Stewie's bedroom. It's a small gesture, but it represents everything. Stewie is starting to accept that while Brian can never be replaced, maybe there's room in his heart for a new friendship. The episode ends on this bittersweet note. Brian is gone forever. The time machine that could have saved him is destroyed beyond repair. But life continues, and love finds new forms. The tragic irony is almost Shakespearean in its cruelty. Stewie destroyed the time machine specifically to prevent something terrible from happening, and that very decision is what makes him unable to save Brian when something terrible does happen. The one time Stewie tries to be responsible and safe, it costs him his best friend. This episode proved that Family Guy could handle serious emotional content without losing its identity. The death felt real, the grief felt authentic, and the healing process felt earned rather than rushed. It's a masterclass in how comedy shows can explore serious themes while still respecting their audience's emotional investment in the characters. Now, if you think losing Brian was the most shocking character transformation in Family Guy history, buckle up. What happens to Meg Griffin next is going to completely redefine your understanding of what this show is capable of exploring. Time to examine Season 8, Episode 11, Dial Meg for Murder, the episode that transformed Family Guy's most pathetic character into its most terrifying. This isn't the usual everyone picks on poor Meg storyline we're used to. This is, holy crap, Meg might actually murder her entire family and bury them in the backyard territory. Remember Meg Griffin, the family scapegoat who just wanted someone, anyone, to show her a little affection and respect? Well, she spends 3 months in prison and returns home as basically a one-person crime syndicate. This transformation is so complete and disturbing that it makes you question everything you thought you knew about the character. The chain of events starts when Brian decides to write an article about teenage girls for Teen People magazine. He's following Meg around for research purposes when he stumbles upon a secret she's been desperately trying to hide. She's been dating a prisoner named Luke through some school pen pal program. And we're not talking about innocent letter writing here. She's been making regular visits to an adult correctional facility to spend time with this convicted felon. Luke feeds Meg this heartbreaking sob story about how he only robbed that convenience store to pay for his mother's life-saving medication. He's painting himself as this noble criminal, like Jean Valjean stealing bread to feed his starving family. Meg is completely buying into this narrative because finally, someone seems to understand her pain. She tells Brian that she and Luke connect because they're both trapped. Him in actual prison, her in the metaphorical prison of being a Griffin family member. When you think about it, that's not entirely wrong. Meg has spent her entire life being emotionally abused, ignored, and treated like a burden by her own family. From her perspective, finding someone who claims to care about her feelings probably does feel like a miracle, even if that person happens to be incarcerated for armed robbery. But Brian immediately snitches. He runs straight to Peter and Lois with breaking news. Your daughter is dating a violent criminal. They respond by forbidding Meg from having any further contact with Luke. Lois goes into full skeptical parent mode, dismissing the medicine for mommy story as the oldest trick in the criminal handbook. But Meg is convinced she's found true love, because this felon is literally the only person who's ever shown her genuine affection. Then everything escalates at warp speed. There's a prison riot, because of course there is, and Luke manages to escape during the chaos. He shows up at the Griffin house like some kind of romantic hero, and when Meg asks how he managed to break out, he casually jokes about filing down a toothbrush and stabbing the guard who had the most children. Then he laughs and says, "Nah, I just hopped the fence during the riot." What a charming gentleman. Meg hides Luke in her bedroom because she's completely lost in this fantasy of forbidden love. She thinks she's living in some kind of romantic drama where society is trying to keep two soulmates apart. The reality is that she's harboring a dangerous fugitive who could put her entire family at risk. Brian discovers them together and faces a genuine moral dilemma about whether to turn them in. But it doesn't matter, because Peter, in the most Peter way imaginable, accidentally ruins everything by reading TV listings out loud. Tonight at 8, Meg dates a prison escapee. He's not even trying to expose them. He's just casually reading from the TV guide and destroys their entire hiding scheme. Joe Swanson shows up with backup, arrests Luke for escaping custody, and then arrests Meg for harboring a fugitive. The family watches their daughter get handcuffed and hauled off to jail, with Lois somehow shocked that helping criminals evade law enforcement is actually a crime with real consequences. 3 months later, Meg comes home, and she is a completely different human being. She walks through the front door, and the first words out of her mouth are, "You're all my bitches now." Not, "Hi family, I missed you." Not, "Thanks for visiting me in jail." Just a cold, direct declaration of dominance. She demands to know who's considered the biggest, toughest person in the house. Peter starts to answer, probably preparing some dumb joke, and Meg just attacks him. This isn't cartoon violence. This is a full-on prison-style beatdown. She's throwing real punches, wrestling him to the ground, and declaring, "My house now, bitch," while Peter lies there, probably reconsidering every fat joke he's ever made at her expense. The power dynamic in the Griffin household has just completely flipped. When Brian tries to lighten the mood with some humor, Chris, the kid who once thought his own hand was a turkey, warns him to show humility because it might save his life. Think about that for a second. The most innocent member of the family is giving survival tips about dealing with their recently released sister. The bathroom situation is where things get genuinely disturbing. Meg barges in on Peter while he's showering, carrying a loofah like it's some kind of weapon. Peter screams in absolute terror, and this is a man who survived multiple fights with a giant chicken. He's genuinely afraid of his own daughter holding bath accessories. But it gets worse. Meg brings what she calls a poop bucket to her bedroom. She refuses to use the regular bathroom because in prison, you don't make multiple trips. You fill up your container and empty it all at once for efficiency. The smell is so overwhelming that it makes Lois physically gag every time she walks past Meg's room. Here's the detail that made me pause the episode. Meg has been using Lois's expensive blouses as toilet paper. Not metaphorically, she literally grabs designer clothing from her mother's closet and uses it for bathroom purposes. Lois watches in horror as her entire wardrobe becomes disposable hygiene supplies. This isn't typical Family Guy gross-out humor. This is, what has incarceration done to our daughter horror? School doesn't provide any refuge from Meg's new personality. She gets suspended for hospitalizing 3 students by cracking their skulls open. The other kids try to mock her with typical prison jokes, asking if she got her butt hair braided or carved a gun out of soap and forgot to wash with it. But the jokes die pretty quickly when they realize this isn't the same Meg they used to stuff in lockers. This version of Meg will send you to the emergency room. Back at home, Meg announces she's leaving town by the end of the week and demands money for her travel expenses. She orders Peter to punch himself in the face. Not once, repeatedly. And Peter actually does it. He's so terrified of his own daughter that he's giving himself a beating while desperately asking, "Did I do good?" after each self-inflicted blow. It's like watching a nature documentary where the pack hierarchy gets violently overthrown, except the new alpha is a teenage girl who learned violence from hardened criminals. Then comes the armed robbery. Yes, you read that correctly. Meg forces Chris to drive her to Goldman's pharmacy, where she pulls out an actual firearm and demands money. Mort Goldman, bless his nervous heart, offers her the donation jar for children with leukemia, which he admits he's never actually donated anyway. But Meg is beyond caring about ironic charity fraud at this point. Brian is the only family member brave enough to try intervention. He attempts to talk her down, reminding her about Luke, about who she used to be before prison changed her. But Meg completely loses it. She screams that she doesn't care about Luke anymore, that nobody has ever cared about her, so why should she care about anyone else? She tells Brian to call the police, because going back to prison doesn't even matter to her at this point. That's when Brian plays his trump card. Remember that Teen People article he was supposed to write? He shows Meg the final draft. He wrote about her uncommon resilience that can only be admired, and described her as far sweeter and kinder than the typical American teenager. It's literally the first time in Meg's entire life that anyone has written something genuinely nice about her. The first time someone has seen her as more than a punchline or a burden. Reading those words breaks through all the prison-hardened exterior she's built up. Meg starts crying, hands over the gun, and thanks Brian for reminding her who she really is underneath all that learned violence. She admits that she was so exhausted from being everyone's punching bag that it felt good to be the one doing the punching for once. And honestly, can you blame her? After years of psychological abuse from her own family, she finally had the power to fight back. For 3 months, she was the one people were afraid of, instead of the one being victimized. The family welcomes back normal Meg, with obvious relief. Peter and Lois actually say they prefer her as their submissive daughter, which is deeply disturbing when you think about it. They literally want their child to accept abuse rather than stand up for herself. Meg tries to lighten the mood by mentioning that she met Wesley Snipes in prison. Apparently, he was inmate number 57, which she attempts to connect to his movie, Passenger 57. But nobody gets the reference. What's really dark about this episode is how it illustrates the failure of the prison system. Meg went in as a naive girl who made one mistake, hiding her boyfriend for maybe an hour. She came out ready to commit armed robbery, having learned violence, intimidation, and antisocial behavior from actual criminals. Prison didn't rehabilitate her. It created a monster. The Griffin family, who had spent years treating Meg like human garbage, suddenly experienced genuine terror when their victim gained the ability to fight back. They were legitimately afraid of their own daughter. Only Brian showing Meg that someone actually valued her as a person managed to bring back the old Meg. But the message is crystal clear. The prison system doesn't fix people, it breaks them. And sometimes, they come home more dangerous than when they left. Think about the transformation here. Meg Griffin, historically the most pathetic character in the entire show, became the most frightening. All it took was 3 months in jail. That's not comedy, that's social commentary wrapped in cartoon format. The episode forces us to confront some uncomfortable questions about how we treat people who are different, powerless, or vulnerable. The Griffin family created the conditions that made Meg desperate enough to date a criminal in the first place. Their years of emotional abuse and neglect drove her to seek affection from literally anyone who would show her kindness, even a convicted felon. When Meg returned from prison as a genuinely dangerous person, they were horrified by what she'd become. But they never acknowledged their role in creating the desperation that led to her incarceration. They just wanted their compliant victim back, someone they could continue abusing without consequences. It's a surprisingly deep exploration of cycles of violence, institutional failure, and family dysfunction, all disguised as a cartoon episode about a teenage girl learning to fight in prison. Family Guy at its most subversive. using dark humor to expose some pretty ugly truths about American society. And if you think Meg's transformation was the wildest character development the show has ever attempted, make sure you hit that subscribe button because we're just getting started. The stories we've covered so far are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Family Guy's most shocking plot twists and character revelations. Trust me, there are even more mind-bending episodes where characters face impossible choices, reality itself gets questioned, and the show pushes boundaries you never thought animated comedy could cross. The Griffin family story is far from over, and the most twisted plot developments are still ahead of us. Moving into the Cleveland-Loretta Quagmire from Season 4, Episode 5, we encounter one of the most brutal character destructions Family Guy has ever orchestrated. We're not just talking about catching your spouse cheating, we're talking about discovering your wife has been sleeping with your supposed best friend, having her call you pathetic to your face, and then getting kicked out of your own house. Cleveland Brown's response? He essentially just accepts it all. The level of emotional devastation here is almost uncomfortable to watch. The catastrophe begins during what should have been a perfectly normal day on Peter's boat. Everyone's having a great time. Peter's hired Portuguese servants named Santos and Pascual, who serve drinks in full tuxedos, because that's exactly the kind of over-the-top nonsense Peter would do. The whole crew is there. Joe and Bonnie looking happy, Quagmire doing his usual inappropriate hitting on Meg, Cleveland and Loretta appearing like the perfect married couple. There's even a moment where Peter catches a fish that somehow flies directly into Loretta's cleavage, and Peter reaches in to retrieve it while making jokes about it being his best friend's wife, like it's completely innocent. Looking back, that moment feels eerily prophetic given what's about to unfold. The day takes a dramatic turn when Joe falls overboard during a game of charades. He's attempting to act out Natalie Wood, already dark humor territory, tumbles into the water, and nearly drowns because paralyzed legs don't exactly help with swimming. The near-death experience convinces everyone they should take CPR classes, which seems like a responsible adult decision. Spoiler alert, it's not going to end well. Peter becomes absolutely insufferable with his new CPR certification. He carries that certification card everywhere like it's some kind of federal badge. He's literally tackling random pedestrians on the street, trying to save people who are perfectly fine. He keeps attempting to remove people's pants to check if they've soiled themselves, because apparently he thinks that's standard emergency medical protocol. Naturally, they revoke his certification pretty quickly. But while Peter's creating chaos with his misguided heroism, he and Brian hear what sounds like someone screaming from Cleveland's house. Peter gets excited. Finally, a real emergency where he can use his, already revoked, CPR skills. They burst through the door, ready to save the day. What they discover instead is about to completely ruin Cleveland's entire existence. Peter and Brian walk in on Loretta having extremely passionate sex with someone on the couch. Peter's initial assumption is that it's Cleveland, and he makes an awkward comment about Cleveland's cute little white ass. Then Brian realizes the obvious problem. Wait, that's not Cleveland. That's some white guy. The realization hits them like a freight train. Loretta is having an affair. They see enough details to identify the mystery man, skinny white guy with a distinctive tattoo on his left butt cheek. They don't see his face, but they've seen enough to know Cleveland's world is about to implode. Peter, being Peter, immediately decides everyone needs to know about the affair. He literally declares that they've done everything in the world. So spreading gossip about Loretta's infidelity is the only activity left for entertainment. Classic Peter logic, turning someone's marital crisis into his personal amusement. Later, when they're hanging out at Quagmire's house and his phone rings while they're outside, they notice something through the window that solves the mystery in the worst possible way. Quagmire is naked for reasons unknown, and he has the exact same tattoo on his butt. Mystery solved. Cleveland's wife is sleeping with Quagmire. The way Peter breaks the devastating news to Cleveland is painfully characteristic. He starts rambling about Superman 2 and that weird cellophane S-weapon Superman uses once and never again. Then, with zero transition or sensitivity, he starts making sex noises. Bam, bam, bam. He's actually imitating Loretta's moans during the affair, even getting Brian to join in as Bam Bam from the Flintstones. It's so wildly inappropriate and insensitive, but somehow Cleveland understands what Peter's trying to communicate. When Cleveland finally confronts Loretta about the affair, her response is absolutely soul-crushing. She doesn't deny it. She doesn't apologize. She doesn't even pretend to feel remorse. Instead, she goes straight for his masculinity. I'm a woman, Cleveland. I need some passion in my life. I need a real man. And Lord knows, that ain't you. The audacity is staggering. She cheated on him, and she's attacking his manhood as if it's his fault? But what makes the situation infinitely worse is Cleveland's reaction. UI apologizes to her. He actually says he's sorry, admitting he doesn't always come home with that reunite on ice energy she apparently requires. Loretta is so disgusted by his apology that she calls him pathetic for saying sorry when she's the one who betrayed their marriage. She walks out, while Cleveland weakly calls after her that he loves her. Cleveland shows up at the Griffin house with all his possessions, officially homeless. Peter tells the kids to treat Cleveland like family, specifically like cousin Janine, who were polite to, but then mock her diabetes on the drive home. Even in someone's darkest hour, Peter manages to be casually cruel. Chris immediately starts touching Cleveland's hair, fascinated by its texture and comparing it to sheep's wool, because the Griffin family has zero boundaries, even during emotional emergencies. What concerns everyone most is Cleveland's complete lack of emotional response. His wife cheated with his friend, called him pathetic, kicked him out of his own home, and he's just... Peter tries everything to provoke some anger. He takes Cleveland to wrestling matches, hoping the aggressive atmosphere will spark some rage. Nothing works. Then Peter does something incredibly cruel but effective. He performs a graphic impression of Quagmire having sex with Loretta, complete with sound effects and hip movements. That finally breaks Cleveland's composure. He starts hyperventilating with fury and goes after Quagmire with genuine murderous intent. Peter tries to protect Quagmire by hiding him at Mayor West's house, where the mayor, being his usual eccentric self, gives Quagmire a sock for protection and cryptically says, "When the time comes, you'll know." Classic Mayor West, completely unhelpful but memorably weird. The final confrontation between Cleveland and Quagmire gets physical, with actual fighting while Peter, thinking he's being helpful, arranges for Loretta to show up. Peter's plan is supposedly to reconcile them, but he clearly doesn't grasp how devastating this betrayal has been. When Loretta arrives expecting some kind of intervention, Cleveland finally shows a backbone. He tells her what she did was unforgivable and declares their marriage officially over. But Loretta's response reveals everything about her character. She's completely fine with it. She announces she's done being his wife, and while she acknowledges she's not perfect, she claims she deserves better than him. They both walk away, and the marriage dies right there. Here's what really gets under your skin. Cleveland forgives Quagmire almost immediately. He even insists that Quagmire kick him in the groin on live television as part of some comedy routine. He'd rather endure physical humiliation than hold on to his justified anger. It's like he's internalized everything Loretta said about him being pathetic. The deeper tragedy here is that Cleveland's passive response actually validates Loretta's criticism. She claimed he wasn't a real man, that he lacked passion, and his reaction to her infidelity essentially proves her point. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, not reason of conscience. His inability to fight for his marriage confirms her reasons for cheating in the first place. Cleveland loses everything in a single episode: his wife, his home, his dignity, and he discovers his friend Quagmire is completely untrustworthy. But instead of learning to stand up for himself, he just accepts it all and moves forward, having learned nothing about self-respect or setting boundaries. The show literally destroyed an entire life and had the victim thank people for the experience. The most heartbreaking aspect isn't even played entirely for laughs. There's something genuinely tragic about watching Cleveland accept abuse from everyone: his wife, his friend, even the Griffins who are supposedly helping him. He's so accustomed to being mistreated that he doesn't know how to fight back when it matters most. From Quagmire's perspective, the Cleveland-Loretta Quagmire reveals just how far Family Guy's resident sleazeball was willing to go. We're examining a character who betrayed his supposed best friend by conducting an ongoing affair with his wife, only to get caught because of a tattoo on his butt. The level of stupidity required to get exposed that way is almost impressive. Looking back at Peter's boat party, there were warning signs that everyone missed. When Loretta casually mentions they have 3-bean salad, Quagmire gets weirdly enthusiastic about it. He suggests they should do something like that again and calls her Little Neck, which isn't exactly normal behavior toward your friend's wife. But Cleveland was oblivious, probably thinking about pie or sports or anything except the possibility that his friend was already planning to seduce his wife. During the infamous fish and cleavage incident, where Peter has to reach into Loretta's shirt to retrieve a wayward fish, Quagmire was standing there, having already begun his affair. He watched that awkward moment unfold while secretly betraying Cleveland. The sheer audacity of maintaining his friendship facade while actively pursuing Cleveland's wife shows just how calculating Quagmire can be. When Peter and Brian burst into Cleveland's house expecting a medical emergency and instead discover Loretta having passionate sex with an unidentified man, they manage to gather crucial evidence. They can't see the guy's face, but they notice one unmistakable detail: a tattoo on his left butt cheek. At that moment, they have no idea they're looking at Quagmire's rear end. The revelation comes later in the most ridiculous way possible. Peter and Brian are hanging out at Quagmire's house, calling his phone from outside. His number, for some inexplicable reason, is 555. 143. Apparently that detail mattered to someone. As Quagmire answers his phone, he's completely naked for reasons that are never explained, and they see it clearly: the exact same tattoo on his left butt cheek. Case closed. Busted by his own posterior artwork. When they confront him over the phone, Quagmire immediately panics and starts making excuses. He's desperately begging. "I knew something like that was going to happen. I didn't mean for it to go that far. It never felt right." He's pleading with Peter not to tell Cleveland, but come on. Expecting Peter Griffin to keep a secret is like expecting a tornado to be discreet. Peter has the impulse control of a caffeinated toddler with gossip. Quagmire's attempts at justification are pathetic. He leaves Cleveland a voicemail trying to reminisce about their wild and crazy guy comedy routines, as if shared jokes somehow excuse sleeping with the man's wife. When Cleveland shows up at his door ready for violence, Quagmire's entire defense strategy boils down to, "Oops, my bad." Peter attempts to protect Quagmire by hiding him at Mayor West's house, where the mayor gives him a mysterious sock and says, "When the time comes, you'll know what to do with it." Nobody ever figures out what that means, but Quagmire clutches that sock like it's going to save him from Cleveland's righteous fury. During the confrontation, Cleveland is chasing Quagmire around like a Terminator. declaring, "You violated the sanctity of my marriage." Quagmire's running for his life, probably regretting every decision that led to getting caught. For someone who constantly brags about his sexual conquests, he becomes remarkably cowardly when facing the consequences of sleeping with his friend's wife. What makes Quagmire's betrayal even worse is that it clearly wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. He was conducting an ongoing affair with Loretta, sneaking around behind Cleveland's back for what was probably months. Every beer they shared, every joke they laughed at together, every moment of friendship was built on Quagmire's lies and deception. The symbolism of that tattoo is almost poetic. Quagmire probably got it thinking it made him look cool or edgy, never considering it would become the evidence that exposed him as a homewrecker. You can hide phone calls, delete text messages, and lie about your whereabouts, but you can't hide identifying marks when you're caught literally with your pants down. After everything, Drodge, the betrayal, the lies, the complete destruction of Cleveland's marriage, Quagmire faces minimal consequences. Cleveland's entire life implodes, Loretta leaves town, and Cleveland has to rebuild everything from scratch. But Quagmire, he returns to his bachelor pad, his flight attendant job, and his constant pursuit of women. The only thing that changes is having one less friend, and knowing Quagmire, he probably doesn't lose much sleep over it. The episode reveals Quagmire for what he truly is, not just a harmless pervert with funny catchphrases, but someone willing to destroy his closest friendship for sexual gratification. He's the guy who'll giggity his way into ruining lives, and then act victimized when he gets caught. That tattoo becomes a permanent reminder that even the sneakiest cheaters leave evidence that eventually exposes their true nature. Cleveland's eventual forgiveness almost makes it worse. Quagmire gets to keep his life, while Cleveland loses everything, and the betrayer faces no lasting consequences for his actions. It's a masterclass in how toxic people can destroy others' lives and walk away unscathed. But hold on, if you think friendship betrayal is brutal, wait until you see what a desperate brother will do to his own sister. What comes next will redefine your understanding of sibling cruelty. Better Off Meg from Season 18. Episode 18 presents us with something truly shocking. Chris Griffin committing what amounts to kidnapping against his own sister to maintain his popularity at school. Not accidental harm, not thoughtless cruelty, but deliberate imprisonment because he values being cool more than Meg's freedom and safety. The insanity begins on school skip day, when literally nobody bothers to tell Meg about it. She shows up to a completely empty building while her entire family enjoys themselves at the pier without her. Standard Griffin family behavior, right? But then fate intervenes in the most bizarre way possible. Through a mix-up at a bowling alley, Meg's driver's license ends up with another teenage girl who subsequently dies in a car crash near Tom Tucker's apartment building. When the body is burned beyond recognition, police identify the victim as Meg Griffin based solely on the license found at the scene. Joe Swanson arrives at the Griffin house with his hat pressed solemnly against his chest, delivering the tragic news of Meg's death. He even mentions that she was one stamp away from earning a free Quiznos sub, as if that's the real tragedy worth noting. The family goes through the motions of grieving while Meg, very much alive, realizes something incredible. Nobody cares enough to verify whether she's actually dead. So, Meg makes a decision that's honestly perfectly logical given her circumstances. She's going to disappear and reinvent herself as Natalie Hallway in another town. For someone who spent her entire life being abused and neglected, the opportunity for a fresh start must seem like a miracle. Meanwhile, Chris's life undergoes a complete transformation after Meg's supposed death. Girls at school suddenly find him interesting and sympathetic. One actually kisses him and expresses condolences about his sister. When he randomly asks for stamps, she eagerly agrees to help. The basketball team invites him to play, teachers give him keys to the driver's education car, popular kids share their lunch with him. For the first time in Chris Griffin's pathetic existence, people actually like him and want to be around him. The tragedy is that Meg, despite years of abuse from her family, genuinely misses them. She especially misses Lois, which is heartbreaking when you consider how Lois typically treats her. Eventually, Meg realizes she can't stay away forever and calls Chris from the cemetery, asking him to meet her so she can explain everything and come home. Chris shows up and initially seems genuinely happy to see Meg alive. For a brief moment, you think maybe one Griffin family member actually cares about her well-being. Meg tells him she wants to return home, and that's when Chris's expression changes completely. He explains that everything is different now. He's popular at school. Meg, not understanding the implications, assumes he's talking about their father finally getting that Peloton bike he's been wanting. Chris confirms that Peter did buy the exercise equipment, but predictably never uses it. He blamed the Wi-Fi connectivity, and then consumed an entire chicken while sitting on the couch. Classic Peter behavior. But that's not what Chris means at all. Chris starts leading Meg toward a van, and she follows, because why wouldn't she trust her brother? Then, without any warning or explanation, Chris physically shoves her inside and locks the door. Meg starts screaming, pounding on the walls, begging to be released. Chris actually apologizes, but explains he can't let her come home just yet, because he's too popular now to give that up. Let that sink in completely. Chris Griffin kidnapped his own sister to maintain his social status at high school. The van has these drivers who engage in a weird debate about departure signals. That one wants to slap the side twice, the other prefers people just yell okay or all right. They drive away with Meg trapped inside, screaming for help. while Chris just stands there watching. He observes his sister getting driven away in a vehicle he locked her in, and he's completely fine with it because the basketball team thinks he's cool now. Meg's trapped in that van trying to maintain her sanity. She asks Siri to play Seals and Croft but gets actual seal barking sounds instead because apparently even technology hates Meg. In desperation, she starts repeatedly hitting her head against the cement floor, trying to create what she calls a blood luge to help her slide out of the van. She's literally giving herself head trauma in an attempt to escape imprisonment. She finally manages to break free and bursts into the school gymnasium during her own memorial assembly. John Mayer is performing for some reason, and Principal Shepard's first concern isn't that a supposedly dead student just walked in, and he's worried about her wearing dark-soled shoes on the gym floor. Even during her moment of vindication, the universe finds ways to mistreat Meg. Meg announces she's alive and points directly at Chris, screaming, "He did that to me!" She explains that Chris kidnapped her to preserve his popularity. But the family's response is either disbelief or complete indifference. Number 2, it's difficult to determine which is worse. Chris delivers a fake apology speech about how he shouldn't have treated Meg badly and claims that if she were there today, she'd be the first person to agree with his sentiment. Meg is literally standing right there, screaming that she is present, but the crowd starts chanting so loudly, it completely drowns out her voice. Consider what happened here. After years of emotional abuse, physical neglect, and constant humiliation, Meg thought she'd found an escape route. She faked her death to get away from her horrible family situation. But when she tried to return because she missed them despite everything, her own brother, arguably the least cruel family member, locked her in a van and had her driven away. Not because he hated her or was angry with her, but because classmates were finally being nice to him. The family eventually takes Meg back, and they have some philosophical discussion about how everyone fakes things in life. Women fake orgasms, men fake enjoying their wives' cooking, raccoons fake liking people who feed them, but nobody addresses the fact that Chris committed a serious crime. He imprisoned his sister in a vehicle, and it's treated like just another wacky Griffin family adventure. Chris's betrayal represents the ultimate cruelty toward Meg. She's been insulted and ignored by Peter, neglected by Lois, forgotten by Stewie. But Chris was supposed to be different. They're both unpopular at school, they both get picked on, they should understand each other's struggles. But the second Chris gets a taste of the popularity Meg has wanted her entire life, he literally imprisons her to keep it for himself. The casual way everyone dismisses Chris's actions reveals how normalized betrayal and cruelty have become in the Griffin household. Kidnapping barely registers as noteworthy behavior. Chris chose being invited to play basketball over his sister's freedom and safety. He looked her in the eye, physically forced her into a van, and walked away. And based on his character, he'd probably make the same choice again. The episode demonstrates that even the supposedly nice Griffins will sacrifice Meg the moment they benefit from her absence. Chris experienced his first taste of not being a social outcast, and he was instantly willing to commit a felony to preserve that feeling. That's not just cruel, it's genuinely sociopathic behavior, disguised as teenage insecurity. Now brace yourself, because what happens next somehow manages to be even more emotionally devastating. Foreign Affairs from Season 9, Episode 17, delivers something completely unexpected. Bonnie Swanson, the seemingly devoted wife of paralyzed police officer Joe, traveling to Paris with the explicit intention of having an affair, not accidentally falling into temptation or getting swept up in unexpected romance. She literally planned her betrayal before boarding the plane, setting the stage for how calculated her actions are. Lois is excited about their Paris vacation, talking enthusiastically about visiting museums and shopping, living her best tourist fantasy. Then Bonnie drops a devastating revelation. "I didn't come all the way here to visit museums and shops." When Lois asks why she made the trip, Bonnie doesn't hesitate. "I came here to have an affair." She's so desperate for attention that she adds, "I'll even do a Muslim if I have to," which combines casual prejudice with her desperation in an unsettling way. They're sitting at a Parisian cafe, where Lois orders an almond croissant and beer, an odd combination, but whatever. And Bonnie spots some random French man and declares, "You know what I'd really like? A piece of that." When Lois expresses shock at her friend's intentions, Bonnie explains that she and Joe have been growing apart for years. Then she delivers what might be the most devastating line about marriage ever spoken on Family Guy. They've been married for 80 years. When Lois questions that timeline, Bonnie clarifies, "Married to a handicapped guy years." That single line reveals everything about Bonnie's mindset. She's not just unhappy with her marriage. She's been counting every day with Joe as longer than it actually island. She views his disability as something that has aged her, trapped her, and stolen years from her life. It's incredibly harsh, but it's also painfully honest about her true feelings toward their relationship. So, the Frenchman, Francois, approaches their table with what might be the worst pickup approach in television history. He compliments American culture by saying he admires, "You're Gary Shandling, of all people." And Lois tries to politely discourage him, but Bonnie is immediately interested. Francois offers her a warm French baguette, which is already a terrible line. But then he says something truly bizarre. "My intention is to defecate on you." He literally tells her he wants to poop on her as part of his romantic overture. Bonnie's response? She says she'd almost forgotten what it's like to be romanced. Romanced! she's so starved for attention and affection that a French stranger threatening to defecate on her counts as romance in her mind. That's how desperately she wants to escape her marriage. Lois attempts to be the voice of reason, reminding Bonnie about her wedding vows and their daughter Susie. She asks if destroying her marriage is really the example Bonnie wants to set for her child. Bonnie admits Lois makes valid points, but then explains the real issue. She doesn't even recognize Joe anymore. They've both become completely different people. The active, capable police officer she married, who could walk and run and be her equal partner in every aspect of life. That man no longer exists. Despite having this moment of clarity about the consequences, Bonnie goes through with her plan anyway. When Lois returns to their hotel room later, there's a tampon tied to the doorknob, to Sig. Apparently their old sorority signal meaning, I have company. Francois is inside with Bonnie, and their affair has clearly progressed beyond the initial encounter. He's talking about how much he's enjoyed your intimacy these past few days, which indicates they've been together for multiple days. Then he asks the question that changes everything. Will you stay here with me? The affair has evolved from a simple fling into something much more serious. Francois wants Bonnie to remain in Paris permanently. Abandon Joe. Abandon her daughter. Abandon her entire life for a French man she's known for maybe a week. The truly shocking part is that Bonnie seriously considers it. She tells Lois she's thinking about staying, and when Lois objects, Bonnie becomes defensive. She reminds Lois that she was specifically invited on their trip to hang out while I have sex with strangers. At the airport, Bonnie makes her decision. She's not returning to Quahog. She's staying in Paris with Francois, ready to throw away her marriage and abandon her child. But Lois, proving herself a better friend than Bonnie deserves, has called in reinforcements, Joe himself. Joe appears in Paris, having immediately flown there when Lois explained what was happening. He apologizes for neglecting Bonnie, begs her to come home, and reminds her about their daughter's need for her mother. Francois, showing unexpected self-awareness, tells Bonnie it will take approximately 3 years before she realizes he's just a normal jerk who happens to have a French accent. Then comes one of the most surreal moments in Family Guy history. Joe declares he can see only one way to prove his love for Bonnie. Suddenly, miraculously, Joe stands up from his wheelchair. He's actually walking! Bonnie screams in complete disbelief. For a moment, you think maybe Joe's paralysis was psychological, or he's been healed, or something extraordinary is happening. But then Joe quotes Meatloaf lyrics. I would do anything for love, but I won't do that, and presumably sits back down in his wheelchair. He won't permanently walk for her. It's simultaneously a gesture of love and a rejection, showing he cares enough to make the effort but has limits to what he'll sacrifice. Somehow, that brief moment wins Bonnie back. Maybe it's the effort of flying to Paris, maybe it's the temporary walking, maybe she realizes Francois isn't worth destroying her entire life. She declares her love for Joe, and they return home together. Back in Quahog, Joe and Bonnie apparently haven't left their bedroom since returning from Paris, suggesting they're working intensively on rebuilding their physical relationship. Lois reflects that she actually prefers Quahog to Paris, describing the city as just skinny guys rubbing up against you in buses and subways, jabbing you in the thigh with their thing. But let's be honest about what actually happened here. Bonnie traveled to Paris specifically to cheat on her disabled husband. She complained about being married to a handicapped guy like it was a prison sentence. She was prepared to abandon both her husband and infant daughter for a stranger whose romantic approach involved threatening to defecate on her. The only reason she returned was Joe's dramatic gesture, not because she resolved her deep resentment about his disability. The episode exposes the dark reality of the Swanson marriage. Bonnie views Joe's paralysis as something that has ruined her life. She measures their relationship in handicapped guy years, as if being married to him has been torture. She was so desperate for escape that she nearly destroyed everything for a French man she barely knew, and who had already revealed himself to be crude and inappropriate. Joe's brief standing moment is almost cruel in its implications, showing Bonnie exactly what she can't have, what their life could have been if he hadn't been shot and paralyzed. Her return feels less like genuine love and more like resigned acceptance. She's not choosing their marriage, she's accepting her fate. The affair wasn't really about sex or romance. It represented Bonnie's attempt to reclaim a life she feels she lost when Joe's career ended his mobility. Every day spent caregiving instead of just being a wife, dealing with his limitations instead of having an equal partner, accommodating his disability instead of living freely, it all accumulated until Paris seemed like her only escape route. The show glosses over how fundamentally messed up the situation really Island Bonnie planned her betrayal before leaving home. She was willing to abandon her disabled husband and baby daughter. But one brief moment of Joe standing up somehow fixes everything. The underlying issues, PB, her resentment, his limitations, their deteriorating relationship, none of that gets actually resolved. Her return represents acceptance rather than love, resignation rather than choice. The core problems in their marriage remain completely unaddressed, hidden beneath a romantic gesture that doesn't change their daily reality. It's a temporary fix for permanent problems, and the next crisis is probably just around the corner. Let's examine The Old Man and the Big C from Season 11, Episode 3, where Carter Pewterschmidt reveals himself as basically a pharmaceutical supervillain. We're talking about a man who discovers the cure for cancer and decides that treating the disease is more profitable than actually curing it. He's been sitting on humanity's holy grail since 1999, letting millions die while his bank account grows. The chaos begins at a Red Sox game where Quagmire's toupee flies off in front of thousands of people, creating viral embarrassment for everyone involved. While dealing with that social disaster, Brian accidentally overhears devastating news at the hospital. SIR. Carter has terminal cancer, with only 2 weeks left to live. Brian's genuinely crushed, knowing he has to break the heartbreaking news to Lois that her father is dying. Peter, being completely inappropriate as always, has already written Carter's obituary. Carter Pewterschmidt died today of the disease cancer. In lieu of flowers, please send carnival rides to Peter Griffin. But when Lois visits her parents to spend precious time with her dying father, Carter looks healthier than he's appeared in years. Brian's completely confused. He personally witnessed Carter looking like death itself at the hospital. Stewie's been monitoring the situation through a nanny cam and confirms something extremely suspicious is happening. The truth becomes clear when Brian and Stewie break into Pewterschmidt Pharmaceuticals. Stewie literally sledgehammers the security keypad because subtlety has never been his strong suit. Inside, they discover Specimen Z, not Carter's corpse, but something far more shocking, the actual, complete cure for cancer. Carter catches them red-handed and casually admits everything without the slightest hint of shame or remorse. His pharmaceutical company developed the cure years ago. A team of scientists, including what Carter dismissively refers to as a Chinese, who he doesn't particularly like but admits works incredibly hard, successfully created what should be humanity's greatest medical breakthrough. They solved cancer completely. But Carter buried their discovery immediately. His reasoning is as cold as it is logical. Why cure someone of cancer in a day if we can treat them for a lifetime and bill them every step along the way? He's been sitting on the cure since Who Let the Dogs Out was dominating radio stations, calculating that human suffering generates more revenue than human healing. When Brian threatens to expose him to the media and the world, Carter just laughs dismissively. He'll simply be labeled another nut job, left-wing blogger that nobody takes seriously. Carter understands exactly how the system protects wealthy pharmaceutical executives from accountability, even when they're literally withholding life-saving treatments for profit. The betrayal becomes deeply personal when Lois confronts her father directly. She asks, what would happen if someone he actually loves gets cancer, like Mamie, the maid who raised him when his parents were absent? What about his own grandchildren if they develop the disease? Carter appears to break down emotionally, seemingly overcome with guilt, and promises to announce the cure to the world the following day. The family gathers around their television for Carter's historic announcement that will save millions of lives. Instead, he announces Slow Stick, an edible deodorant specifically designed for developmentally disabled people. When Lois calls him immediately, furious about his broken promise to save humanity from cancer, Carter responds with chilling simplicity, I lied, and hangs up the phone. Consider the scope of Carter's evil here. Since 1999, millions of people have died agonizing deaths while he kept the cure locked in a corporate vault. He used the treatment on himself when he developed cancer, but denies it to the rest of humanity. He looked his own daughter in the eye, promised to do the morally correct thing, then immediately broke that promise without any remorse whatsoever. For Carter Pewterschmidt, quarterly earnings reports matter infinitely more than human existence. The episode positions Carter as one of Family Guy's most genuinely evil characters. He's not bumbling or misguided, he's calculated, intelligent, and completely aware of how many people his greed is killing. He represents everything wrong with profit-driven healthcare, taken to its most extreme and horrifying conclusion. 12 and a Half Angry Men from Season 11, Episode 16 puts Adam West on trial for murdering a city aide, and despite overwhelming evidence pointing to his guilt, the jury lets him walk free. 8 more bodies turn up immediately after his acquittal. Coincidence? Probably not. The case seems straightforward initially. A city aide is discovered stabbed to death at West's mansion, killed with West's own knife. Investigators find a blackmail note threatening to expose corruption in city government unless West pays a substantial sum. During a press conference about the murder, a young reporter asks West if he's afraid of the dark, and West completely freaks out, declaring that the dark was off limits in his questioning. Not exactly the response of an innocent man. The trial becomes a complete joke. West's defense attorney delivers a closing argument that literally asks the jury for acquittal as a personal favor, rather than making any legal arguments about evidence or reasonable doubt. The entire proceeding feels more like a popularity contest than a murder trial. Brian ends up on the jury and starts playing amateur detective during deliberations. He points out inconsistencies in the prosecution's case, like how the blackmail note was written on Marriott Hotel stationery instead of official mayor's letterhead. He demonstrates that the witness who claimed to see the murder from a nearby sex party couldn't actually have had a clear view of the crime based on her position during the activities. The jury votes not guilty based on these reasonable doubts. West holds a victory press conference, where he hallucinates rabbit people in the audience and starts quoting Tom Petty lyrics as if they're profound political statements. Everything seems resolved. An innocent man freed by careful jury deliberation. Then the bodies start piling up that very night. 8 people are discovered murdered around Quahog, all killed in their homes. Someone was cutting power lines, breaking into houses, and slitting throats while families slept. Suddenly, West's bizarre behavior during the trial looks completely different. His fear of the dark wasn't just eccentric mayor weirdness. It might have been a serial killer's fixation. His hallucinations and strange statements weren't harmless quirks, but potential signs of serious mental illness. His knife collection wasn't just a hobby, but possibly his preferred murder weapons. The jury was so focused on finding reasonable doubt in the specific case that they may have freed an active serial killer. While they were debating hotel stationery and sightlines, the real murderer was planning his next series of attacks. They either freed the actual killer or wasted crucial time on the wrong suspect while the real murderer continued working. The episode raises disturbing questions about the justice system's ability to handle cases involving mentally unstable defendants. West's obvious psychological problems made him seem like an unlikely murderer, but those same problems might have made him exactly the kind of person who could kill repeatedly without normal emotional responses or logical planning. Peter Assment from Season 8. Episode 14 presents one of Family Guy's most disturbing storylines. Angela, Peter's boss at the Pawtucket Brewery, sexually harassing and eventually coercing him into sex under threat of losing his job. After seeing Peter without glasses for the first time, she becomes obsessed and uses her position of power to force increasingly inappropriate interactions. The situation begins when Peter's glasses get smashed during one of his paparazzi assignments, forcing him to wear contact lenses to work. Angela takes one look at his eyes and eyelashes and immediately becomes fixated. She tells him they're beautiful, and you can see the exact moment her professional demeanor shifts into predatory behavior. When Peter drops a pencil and bends down to retrieve it, Angela actually comments on the view, establishing that she's now seeing him as a sexual object rather than an employee. Peter tries explaining the situation to his family, but they dismiss his concerns entirely. Lois delivers the classic response that women can't sexually harass men because guys like being touched by women, while Meg shares her own experience with a teacher who rubbed her shoulders inappropriately, forcing her into awful things. The show deliberately highlights how male victims of harassment aren't taken seriously. Angela escalates her campaign systematically. First, she orders Peter to wear a special uniform consisting of tight denim shorts that only he has to wear while other employees dress normally. She openly tells him he fills those out nicely, making her sexual interest completely explicit. Then she constructs an elaborate role-play scenario in her office, building a fake gas station set complete with a Diet Pepsi machine. During these forced scenarios, Angela makes Peter pretend his car broke down, demands he wipe a cold can across his neck, and repeats scripted lines like, "I need to cool off." When Peter shows any resistance, she immediately pulls rank. "Maybe you don't need to be employed here." She calls him a slut for participating in activities she's forcing him to do, adding humiliation to the coercion. The harassment invades Peter's home life when Angela starts calling the house. She makes Peter breathe into the phone while she becomes sexually aroused, describing how his breath is filling me up and that she's almost there. She randomly mentions liking kangaroos and buying him a kangaroo t-shirt before demanding he come to her house for a special project, clearly meaning sex. Desperate to escape, Peter attempts to trick Angela by hiding Quagmire in his pants, hoping she'll think she's sleeping with Peter while actually being with Quagmire. Peter even covers by claiming he wants to keep his clothes on because he's self-conscious about my Congressman Barney Frank body. But when Quagmire gets a look at Angela, he immediately bails, calling her a complete dumpster fire. Angela's patience finally runs out. She becomes aggressive, yelling, "I'm having sex with you right now!" while Peter screams, "No, I don't want to!" That's when she delivers the ultimate coercion. "Griffin, you have sex with me, or you're fired." Peter finally stands up for himself, telling her to fire him rather than continue the harassment. But instead of ending there, the story takes a bizarre turn. After a hallucination of Robert Mitchum tells him to be a man, Peter drives drunk to Angela's apartment to confront her, only to discover her attempting suicide in her garage with car exhaust. Angela breaks down, revealing she hasn't been intimate with anyone in 10 years and doesn't even remember what sex feels like anymore. She describes it as something painful, where you grit your teeth and let us do what we want. Suddenly, the sexual predator is reframed as a desperate, broken woman, and Peter Fix, who came to punch you and maybe kick you in the boob, softens toward her. The solution involves Peter taking her on a fake date while disguised as Reginald New York Knickerbocker, complete with a mustache. He compliments her bleeding gums by saying, "Your mouth is too sweet for your teeth to want to stay in." When she offers dessert and mentions baking a pie, Peter mutters, "Gross," after claiming there's been a pie baking since I met you. Peter even pretends his doctor gave him only 24 hours to live, so he wanted to spend his last night with the most beautiful woman in the world. But Angela continues the ultimatums. "Sleep with me tonight. Save my life." Peter eventually gives in. After they have sex, Angela reveals she knew it was him all along, smugly telling him, "See you at work on Monday, Griffin." The aftermath is disturbingly minimal. Angela keeps her position, Peter keeps his job, and the sexual coercion is brushed off as resolved. The show frames Peter's coerced sex as somehow heroic because it saved Angela's life, completely ignoring that he was forced into it under threat of unemployment. The episode sends the troubling message that sometimes victims just have to give in to make things easier for everyone. If you think workplace sexual coercion is disturbing, prepare yourself for what happens when a respected news anchor reveals herself as a calculating serial killer. And then there were fewer. From Season 9, Episode 1 delivers Family Guy's most shocking villain reveal when Diane Simmons, the veteran Channel 5 news anchor, confesses to being a methodical serial killer who orchestrated an elaborate murder spree at James Woods' mansion. Her motivation? Destroying everyone who ruined her life after she turned 40? Her confession ends with Stewie shooting her dead just as she's about to execute Lois. The nightmare begins when everyone in Quahog receives mysterious dinner invitations to James Woods' isolated mansion, each claiming the party is being held specifically in their honor. Woods announces he's become a born-again Christian thanks to his young girlfriend Priscilla and wants to make amends with everyone he's wronged throughout his career. The guest list includes the Griffin family, the Swansons, Quagmire with his date Stephanie, Tom Tucker, Diane Simmons, Mayor West, Dr. Hartman, the Goldmans, and several other Quahog residents. During dinner, disaster strikes immediately. A hidden gun fires at Woods' chair, but accidentally kills Stephanie, who had taken his seat moments earlier. Later, during a convenient power outage, someone stabs James Woods to death with a knife from the dinner table. A violent storm destroys the bridge connecting the mansion to the mainland, trapping everyone inside with an active murderer. As bodies accumulate throughout the night, the terrified guests desperately try to identify the killer among them. Priscilla disappears and is discovered dead in Tom Tucker's room. Muriel Goldman is found stabbed to death in another location. Derek gets killed on the roof while attempting to get cell phone reception to call for police backup. The Golden Globe Award used to bludgeon Derek is discovered hidden under Tom Tucker's bed, leading everyone to conclude he must be the murderer. They chase and capture Tom, convinced they've identified and stopped the killer. But when Lois pauses to comfort Diane before leaving the mansion, she notices something that doesn't make sense. Diane mentions that her mother bought her a blouse for her first solo broadcast, which would mean her mother somehow knew Tom wouldn't be anchoring anymore before any murders had actually occurred. Cornered by this logical impossibility, Diane launches into a chilling confession that reveals the true scope of her planning. Everything started when she turned 40, and her entire life collapsed simultaneously. Tom Tucker convinced the station management to replace her with someone younger, and she'd be off the air permanently in 3 weeks. James Woods dumped her around the same time, leaving her professionally and romantically destroyed. Rather than accept this destruction of her career and love life, Diane conceived an elaborate revenge plot. She paid the young intern Priscilla to seduce James Woods and manipulate him into becoming a born-again Christian who would gather all his perceived enemies for a reconciliation weekend. Diane's original plan was to kill James with the hidden gun and frame Tom Tucker for the murder, destroying both men who had discarded her. But everything went wrong when Stephanie randomly sat in James's chair and got shot instead of the intended target. Diane had to improvise rapidly, grabbing a knife during the power outage to personally stab James to death. She then had to eliminate Priscilla when the girl became hysterical and threatened to expose Diane's involvement in the plot. When Muriel Goldman caught her planting evidence in Tom's room, Diane stabbed her too. Derek had to die to prevent him from contacting police before she could complete her frame job against Tom. Diane holds Lois at gunpoint, noting with dark professional humor that Lois will make an excellent story for the Six. Zero news, unless a local cat does something funny. She coldly informs Lois that since she now knows everything, she obviously has to die as well. Just as Diane is about to pull the trigger, a rifle shot rings out from an upstairs window, and Diane falls dead. The shooter reveals himself with characteristic arrogance. If anybody's gonna take that bitch down, it's gonna be me. Stewie Griffin has saved his mother's life with a precisely aimed long-range shot, though his stated motivation is jealousy. He wanted to be the one to kill Lois, not some random news anchor. Diane's revelation shocked viewers because she had always seemed like just another background character, a professional newswoman delivering routine broadcasts. Her age-related career crisis and romantic rejection transformed her from a respected journalist into a methodical killer willing to murder innocent bystanders to protect her revenge scheme. She delivered her confession with the same measured, authoritative tone she used for evening news broadcasts, making her crime seem even more chilling. The episode represents one of Family Guy's darkest ventures into straight dramatic territory, using classic murder mystery elements while maintaining the show's twisted sense of humor. Diane's vanity about aging and fear of professional irrelevance drove her to kill 5 people, showing how desperation can transform seemingly normal people into monsters. Tom Tucker, the man in his dream, from Season 10, Episode 13, shows how Peter Griffin destroyed Tom Tucker's second chance at acting success by abandoning him the moment a bigger celebrity appeared. After convincing Tom to leave his stable news anchor position for Hollywood, Peter drops him without warning to represent James Woods instead. Tom Tucker has been living a secret double life in Quahog. Behind his polished news anchor persona lies George P. Wilbur, the actor who actually played Michael Myers in Halloween 4. When Joyce Kinney accidentally reveals his acting background on live television, Peter Griffin becomes obsessed with helping his favorite horror movie star return to Hollywood glory. Tom initially resists Peter's enthusiasm, comfortable with the stability and respect of his broadcasting career. But Peter's relentless optimism slowly breaks down his defenses. Tom confesses his painful Hollywood history, elegiac, how the industry gave him the cold shoulder after Halloween 4, how he turned to cocaine to cope with rejection, how he only got tiny bit parts in terrible movies, and how he eventually fled back to Quahog to start over as a news anchor. Despite building a successful second career, the dream of acting still haunts Tom's daily life. Peter's unwavering belief in his talent finally wins him over during a particularly humiliating live broadcast where Tom struggles to describe a colonial bedwarmer for several agonizing minutes on air. He realizes he doesn't belong behind a news desk anymore and needs to pursue his true passion. Peter promises to be his agent, claiming he's watched every episode of Entourage and knows exactly how Hollywood works. Tom quits his stable job, abandons everything he's built in Quahog, and follows Peter to Los Angeles based entirely on Peter's assurances. Initially, Peter's unconventional methods seem surprisingly effective. Using ridiculous tactics like wearing old Hollywood Jew glasses and ordering nonsensical items at fancy restaurants, Peter somehow manages to land Tom a guest role on NCIS. Tom delivers his lines perfectly during filming, and for a brief shining moment, his comeback seems genuinely possible. He thanks Peter profusely, calling him one hell of an agent and believing his dreams are finally coming true. Everything changes when James Woods walks into Peter's makeshift office. The supposedly dead celebrity reveals he survived being stabbed at his mansion party, thanks to advanced Hollywood medical technology that infused him with a 17-year-old ingenue's life force. Woods wants Peter as his agent, and Peter immediately agrees despite Tom's desperate protests. Tom reminds Peter that he came to Hollywood specifically to be his agent, but Peter insists he can handle both high-profile clients simultaneously. The truth becomes painfully clear when Tom can't reach Peter for days afterward. His phone calls go unanswered, meetings Peter arranged never materialize, and industry contacts stop returning his messages. Finally, Tom confronts Peter at an expensive lunch, only to receive a piece of paper that simply reads, "Peter Griffin drops Tom Tucker as a client." Peter claims the decision is coming from upstairs, meaning the karate studio located above his office, and explains that everything has changed since Thursday because everything's on computers. He offers no real explanation, no apology, no transition plan. Tom is simply discarded the moment Peter finds a more famous client. Tom is completely devastated. He sacrificed a successful career, steady income, and his entire established life in Quahog based on Peter's promise to help him succeed. Now he's stranded in Hollywood with no agent, no prospects, and no way to move forward. Peter immediately becomes consumed with James Woods' demands, taking late-night calls about whether Woods should take home women who might be the bottom of a white pumpkin. Meanwhile, Tom is left with absolutely nothing. When Woods inevitably fires Peter for being a one-man operation who can't provide the full team of professional handlers a major star requires, Peter finally understands the scope of his betrayal. He finds Tom and offers a genuine apology, admitting he was selfish and dragged Tom to Hollywood, only to abandon him when he needed support most. Tom returns to Quahog and gets his news anchor position back, but at half his original salary. Joyce Kinney welcomes him back with a backhanded comment about his reduced pay, though Tom manages to point out he still earns twice what she does. The dream of returning to acting is permanently dead. Tom sits behind the news desk, reading stories about organic supermarkets and local cruising areas, having learned that some dreams should stay buried. Peter's betrayal didn't just cost Tom a potential acting comeback. It reinforced that in Hollywood, loyalty means nothing when bigger opportunities appear. Tom Tucker remains trapped in Quahog, his Halloween 4 glory days, now just a painful reminder of what might have been if someone had actually believed in him enough to follow through on their promises. The episode perfectly captures how Hollywood destroys people's dreams, not through dramatic failures, but through casual betrayals by people who claim to care about your success. Tom's story shows that sometimes the cruelest thing isn't being told you'll never make it, it's being told you will. Giving up everything to pursue that promise, then being abandoned the moment something better comes along. And there you have it. Family Guy's most shocking character betrayals. From pharmaceutical villains to serial killers to workplace predators. These episodes show the series at its darkest, exploring how ordinary people can become monsters and how trust can be weaponized against those who dare to believe in others. So we're diving into Season 9, Episode 1 of Family Guy, and then there were fewer. And honestly, this episode goes way darker than your typical Family Guy chaos. We're talking about poor Mort Goldman losing his wife Muriel in what becomes one of the show's most twisted murder mystery plots. Mort Goldman's wife Muriel becomes one of several victims during a deadly weekend at James Woods' mansion, where the entire town of Quahog was lured under false pretenses. What started as a supposed reconciliation dinner turned into a massacre, orchestrated by someone nobody suspected. Everyone in Quahog gets these fancy invitations to James Woods' mansion, and they all think they're the guest of honor. Even Mort and Muriel show up, probably expecting some awkward small talk and maybe free food. Woods claims he's found Jesus and wants to apologize to everyone he's wronged, which includes the Goldmans, since apparently he'd been getting illegal OxyContin from their pharmacy for weeks. Muriel had been selling him the pills under threat of blackmail, so yeah, there's already tension before anyone even touches the appetizers. Things go from awkward dinner party to absolute nightmare real quick. First, a hidden gun goes off and accidentally kills Quagmire's date Stephanie instead of Woods. Then, during a convenient power outage, someone stabs Woods to death with a dinner knife. Oh, and a storm destroys the only bridge off the island, so now everyone's trapped in a mansion with a killer. Classic murder mystery setup, except animated, and with Peter Griffin making inappropriate jokes the whole time. Here's where Muriel's story gets tragic. While everyone's running around trying to figure out who the killer is, Muriel accidentally walks into Tom Tucker's room at the worst possible moment. She catches someone planting evidence, specifically, the golden globe that was used to beat Derek to death on the roof. That someone turns out to be Diane Simmons, the news anchor, who's orchestrating this entire murder spree as revenge for losing her job and boyfriend after turning 40. But Muriel doesn't know that yet. She just knows she's seen something she shouldn't have. Diane can't let her live to tell anyone, so she stabs Muriel right there in the room. Just like that, Mort's wife is gone, killed for literally no reason other than bad timing. When they find Muriel's body, Mort's reaction is both heartbreaking and weirdly funny in that dark Family Guy way. He starts trying to say nice things about her. She was so young, she was so beauty, but can't even finish the compliments. He just trails off and says, "We were married." Meanwhile, everyone else is more focused on catching the killer than comforting the guy who just lost his wife. The show barely gives anyone time to process Muriel's death before moving on to the next victim. The really messed up part? Diane shows zero remorse when she eventually confesses. To her, Muriel was just an inconvenience, an obstacle that needed removing to keep her plan on track. She explains the whole thing to Lois like she's reading the weather report, completely emotionless about murdering an innocent woman. Diane gets shot by Stewie before she can kill Lois, but that doesn't bring Muriel back. After everything's over, Mort just goes back to running his pharmacy alone. The show never really deals with how traumatic this would be for him. His wife didn't die because of some grand conspiracy or personal vendetta by Hadamax. She was just collateral damage in someone else's psychotic breakdown about aging and career failure. The episode treats it like just another plot point in the mystery. But when you think about it, Mort's entire life got destroyed because his wife walked through the wrong door at the wrong time. That's darker than anything Family Guy usually throws at us. And they just kind of move on like nothing happened. Classic Family Guy. Traumatize a character for life, then never mention it again. All right, we're jumping into Season 9, Episode 12 of Family Guy, Number German Guy. And this one takes a seriously dark turn when Herbert discovers his elderly neighbor isn't who he claims to be. We're talking about a World War II veteran coming face to face with his former Nazi prison guard in suburban Quahog, and the confrontation nearly kills him. Herbert discovers that Franz Gutentag, the kindly puppet shop owner who befriended Chris, is actually Franz Schlecknacht, a sadistic SS guard from the concentration camp where Herbert was imprisoned during World War II. When Herbert tries to save Chris from this monster, he ends up in a fight for his life against a man who once decided whether prisoners lived or died. The episode starts innocently enough with the Griffins trying to find Chris a hobby because his personal habits are getting out of control. His blanket is so crusty, it could stand on its own, and their washing machine might be pregnant. Yeah, Family Guy went there. After failing at stamp collecting and drinking, because apparently those are appropriate hobbies for a teenager, Chris discovers a puppet shop run by Franz Gutentag, this sweet old German man who teaches him puppetry. Chris is instantly hooked, and Franz seems genuinely happy to have found someone who appreciates his art form. But then Herbert sees Chris hanging out with Franz and immediately recognizes him. The show gives us this wild flashback to 1944, where Herbert was a young Air Force pilot who got shot down over Germany. The Germans thought he was gay for some reason, so instead of sending him to a regular POW camp, they sent him to a concentration camp. And the guard who ran that camp, the one who decided who lived and who died with a simple point of his finger, was Franz Schlecknacht. Herbert remembers being forced to sort recyclables while sticky soda dripped on his hands, which sounds minor compared to what really happened in those camps. But Family Guy turns even Holocaust memories into dark comedy. Herbert tries to warn everyone about Franz's true identity, but nobody believes him. Peter and Lois think Herbert's just being paranoid or maybe jealous that Chris has a new older friend. Chris gets defensive when Herbert confronts him, basically accusing Herbert of just wanting free labor, having Chris clean his pool, shirtless, or wash his car in jean shorts. The whole conversation gets super uncomfortable, and Chris storms off to Franz's house, refusing to believe his friend could be a Nazi war criminal. Franz realizes the jig is up when Chris mentions Herbert's accusations. He captures both Chris and Peter when they come over for dinner, locking them in his basement. The scene where Chris has to figure out which one is his real dad is absolutely ridiculous. Peter and Franz look nothing alike. They never switch places. But Chris still needs Peter to prove his identity by remembering Chris's birthday, which Peter barely manages to do because of course he almost forgets his own son's birthday even when their lives are on the line. While Chris and Peter are trapped, they try everything to escape. They attempt to get Meg's attention through the window by calling her a whale and telling her the ocean is that way. Because even when facing death, the Griffins can't resist bullying Meg. They blast salsa music on a radio to annoy the neighbors, hoping someone will investigate. Eventually, Chris manages to get Herbert's attention through the basement window, and Herbert realizes he was right all along about Franz being a Nazi. The confrontation between Herbert and Franz should be this epic showdown between good and evil, between a Holocaust survivor and his tormentor. Herbert shows up at Franz's house, declaring only one of them will walk out alive. The dramatic music swells, they square off for battle, and then both of them immediately fall asleep standing up. They're so old, they literally can't stay awake long enough to fight. They have to take their pills first. It's Wednesday, so they both need their medications. Franz gets stuck on the couch and needs his nurse Frida to help him up. The whole fight sequence becomes this absurd commentary on how these two mortal enemies are now just fragile old men who can barely function. But when they finally do fight, things get serious. They're grappling near an open window, and Franz starts to fall. Herbert actually tries to save him, reaching out his hand to pull Franz back up. For a moment, you think maybe there's going to be some redemption here, some acknowledgement of shared humanity. But Franz's old bones crack. He loses his grip and falls to his death. Herbert delivers this badass line, "Say goodnight, you Nazi bastard," but you can tell he's exhausted from the whole ordeal. The immediate aftermath shows Chris and Peter being freed from the basement, with Chris finally understanding that Herbert was trying to protect him all along. Chris apologizes for not believing Herbert, and for all those cruel things he said. Herbert forgives him instantly, telling Chris that sometimes you need to lose something to appreciate what you had. Their friendship is restored, and Chris realizes Herbert was his true friend, not the Nazi war criminal with the puppet shop. The episode wraps up with Peter making sure Herbert passed along his Thunder Thighs insult to Meg, because even after nearly being murdered by a Nazi, Peter's priorities remain consistently terrible. But the real lasting impact here is how Family Guy managed to take one of history's darkest chapters and turn it into a bizarre comedy about two elderly men too frail to properly fight each other. Herbert survived the Holocaust, decades of life in Quahog, and now a confrontation with his former prison guard, all while maintaining his creepy interest in Chris. The show basically says that even the most evil people from history eventually just become sad old men who need help getting off the couch. Franz Schlecknacht went from deciding who lived and died in concentration camps to dying because his brittle old bones couldn't handle a simple struggle. There's something weirdly poetic about that, even if Family Guy handles it with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Herbert gets his revenge not through violence or strength, but simply by outliving his tormentor and being there when Franz's body finally gives out. Sometimes the best revenge really is just living longer than the bastards who tried to kill you. We're looking at Season 9, Episode 13 of Family Guy, Trading Places, where Peter Griffin attempts to drug his housekeeper Consuela with chloroform to get rid of her. The episode shows Peter's increasingly desperate attempts to fire a maid who simply refuses to leave, culminating in him trying to knock her unconscious. Peter Griffin tries to chloroform Consuela, the Griffin family's stubborn housekeeper who refuses to be fired, in a desperate attempt to remove her from their house. When all conventional methods of getting rid of her fail, Peter resorts to asking her to smell a rag soaked in chloroform, though the scene cuts away before we see the actual outcome. The whole mess starts because Lois is fed up with constantly cleaning up after Peter. After he and Quagmire make a massive Kool-Aid mess in the kitchen, with Peter acting like a child and hiding from Lois when she demands he clean it up, she decides to hire a maid. Enter Consuela, a Hispanic housekeeper who shows up wearing full makeup and introduces herself to Mr. Peter right from the start. There's something off about the dynamic. Peter makes an insensitive comment about her appearance, asking if wearing makeup is going out for them, showing his typical casual racism. At first, Consuela seems like a normal housekeeper, but things quickly get weird. She starts playing loud Latin music while cleaning, which annoys Peter. She brings her nephew Mikey to the house to sell light-up yo-yos. She refuses to give Peter blankets when he's cold, telling him, "You fat, keep you warm." But the real problems begin when she simply won't leave. She stays hours after her shift ends, claiming she's waiting for the rain to stop. When Lois points out it's going to rain all night, Consuela just announces, "I sleep here," and makes herself at home. The Griffins realize they've got a serious problem, a housekeeper who's essentially moved in and treats their house like her own. The situation escalates when Lois tries to fire Consuela directly. She tells her the arrangement isn't working out and asks her to leave. Consuela's response? "No, I stay, I clean." When Lois explicitly says, "You're fired," Consuela simply replies, "No, I keep job." They even try bribing her with $40 to leave immediately, but she refuses that too. The show presents this as comedy, but there's something genuinely unsettling about someone refusing to leave your home when asked. Peter and Lois are at their wits' end, dealing with someone who seems completely immune to normal social conventions about employment and boundaries. This is when Peter decides to take drastic action. We see him approach Consuela with a rag in his hand and ask, Consuela, does this rag smell like chloroform?" She starts to respond, "No, no is no." And then the scene cuts away. The implication is clear. Peter is attempting to drug his housekeeper unconscious to finally get her out of the house. The show treats this as just another wacky Peter Griffin scheme. But when you think about it, he's literally attempting to commit assault with a chemical weapon against an employee who won't leave. The immediate aftermath is cleverly obscured by the show cutting to a different scene entirely. We don't see if Peter's chloroform plan actually works or if Consuela somehow avoids it. The next time we see her, she's at the door asking for more lemon pledge, suggesting either the chloroform didn't work or she recovered and came back anyway. The show never directly addresses what happened with the chloroform attempt, leaving it as one of those dark jokes that Family Guy throws in and then immediately moves past. The doorbell rings, there's news about a fire at Quahog Liquor and a dead dog, which turns out to be a fake-out involving Brian, and suddenly everyone's attention is elsewhere. The long-term implications of this episode are pretty messed up when you analyze them. Peter attempted to drug someone who works in his home because firing her normally didn't work. The show plays it for laughs, but in reality, using chloroform on someone is incredibly dangerous. It can cause liver and kidney damage, cardiac arrhythmia, or even death if too much is inhaled. Peter's solution to an employment dispute is literally attempting to poison his housekeeper. And the fact that Consuela appears to continue working for the Griffins in later episodes suggests either the chloroform didn't work, or worse, it did work, but she came back anyway, and everyone just pretends it didn't happen. This whole storyline reflects Family Guy's approach to controversial humor, 99, taking a situation that would be serious assault in real life and playing it as a throwaway gag. The show seems to suggest that Consuela is such an immovable force that even chemical weapons can't get rid of her, turning her into almost a supernatural presence in the Griffin household. But underneath the comedy, there's something deeply uncomfortable about watching someone attempt to drug another person, especially in an employer-employee relationship where there's already a power imbalance. The episode never really resolves the Consuela situation properly. She becomes a recurring character who just shows up whenever the show needs a stubborn housekeeper joke. The chloroform incident is never mentioned again, becoming just another example of Peter doing something horrible that gets forgotten by the next episode. The show essentially normalizes the idea that if someone won't leave your house, drugging them is a reasonable solution, which is obviously insane. What makes this even weirder is that Consuela isn't presented as threatening or dangerous. She's just stubborn and refuses to follow social norms about employment. Her biggest crimes are playing loud music, bringing her nephew around, and refusing to leave when asked. Annoying? Sure. Worth attempting to chloroform? That's where Family Guy loses the plot entirely, turning what could be a simple comedy about a difficult employee into something that involves attempted assault with a controlled substance. We're diving into Season 15, Episode 16 of Family Guy, Saturated Fat Guy, where the episode opens with one of the most ridiculous character deaths in the show's history. Angela, Peter's longtime boss at the Pawtucket Brewery, has apparently died from swimming too soon after eating, and Peter's delivering her eulogy at what turns out to be the completely wrong funeral. Angela, the brewery supervisor who spent years tormenting and occasionally helping Peter Griffin, dies from swimming less than 30 minutes after she had eaten. Peter reveals this absurd cause of death during a funeral eulogy, where he warns children that this old wives' tale is actually real and they should listen to their mothers about waiting to swim after meals. The episode kicks off with Peter standing at a podium in a funeral home, clearly uncomfortable and struggling to find the right words. He starts with that classic awkward funeral opening, quoting Webster's dictionary definition of class, before immediately spiraling into a bizarre stream of consciousness. He's trying to honor Angela's memory, but keeps defaulting to TV show references because he has no idea how to handle genuine emotion or death. He asks who could turn the world on with her smile, then answers, Angela, mimicking the Mary Tyler Moore Show theme. He continues with references to Friends. So no one told you life was going to be this way. Cheers. Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name, and even starts humming the Sanford and Son theme song before admitting that death is just really hard for him to process. When Peter finally gets to the actual circumstances of Angela's death, he delivers the information completely straight-faced, as if he's sharing important safety information. Angela died doing what she loved, swimming less than 30 minutes after she had eaten. He turns to the children in attendance and solemnly tells them this is a real thing, and they should listen to their mothers about it. The show presents this moment without any irony or acknowledgement that swimming after eating causing death is completely false. According to Peter's understanding of events, Angela literally died because she ignored the universal mom rule about waiting to swim after meals, and now she's dead because of stomach cramps or whatever Peter imagines happens when you break this sacred rule. Peter continues the eulogy by describing Angela as fearless, spontaneous, and honest about herself and the world around her. He mentions her grace, courage, and unmatched zest for life. She may be gone, he says, but her voice will live on in DVD and Hulu Plus and Tiny Droid projected messages. He concludes by saying that while he may have lost a boss, heaven has gained a princess. Then, in the most Peter Griffin move possible, he realizes he's at the entirely wrong funeral. He's been eulogizing his boss to a room full of complete strangers who have no connection to Angela, the Pawtucket Brewery, or anything Peter's been talking about for the past several minutes. After the opening credits, we cut to the Pawtucket Brewery, where the employees are gathering for a meeting. There's quiet chatter, as everyone wonders what's going to happen now that Angela is gone. Nobody mentions the swimming incident or questions the circumstances of her death. The show just accepts that Angela is dead from violating a childhood pool rule and moves on to introducing her replacements. Enter Bert and Sheila, an interracial couple who've been chosen to split Angela's job between them. They make a big deal about being an interracial couple, with Bert saying, "Do not adjust your TV sets. We are an interracial couple." They explain they're splitting the job because one of the shareholders' favorite songs was Ebony and Ivory, which might be the worst reason for a management decision ever presented on television. They try to make the transition easier by suggesting employees call them Bela or Shirt instead of remembering two names, and they speak by alternating words between them, which immediately makes everyone uncomfortable. The show moves from Angela's death to her replacement so quickly that her absence barely registers as significant. Peter immediately assumes the biracial management team wants some kind of sexual situation and offers to have sex with Sheila on the desk while Bert watches, because that's apparently where his mind goes when confronted with an interracial couple in a position of authority. The new bosses have to explain that's not what this is about at all. They want to make operations more efficient, which in Peter's case means making him the office recyclables guy with a flag attached to him so people know where to throw their empty containers. Angela's death has led directly to Peter being turned into a human recycling bin. The episode continues with Peter's work life getting progressively worse under the new management. They make him taste test seasonal beers, while also collecting trucker urine samples that come down the same conveyor belt in similar-looking cups. He has to quickly identify which cups contain pumpkin ale versus methamphetamine-laced trucker pee, which seems like a health code violation that would definitely not have happened under Angela's management. Sure, Angela had her problems, heterosexual. She sexually harassed Peter, made his life difficult, and was generally an antagonist, but at least she never made him potentially drink trucker urine. Eventually, Bert and Sheila decide Peter should become the new brewery mascot after they find him drinking beer on a toilet while playing games on his phone. They think this perfectly represents their target customer, which is somehow both insulting and probably accurate. Peter becomes Pawtucket Pat, replacing the traditional 250-year-old mascot with himself as an everyman who drinks beer in bathrooms. Brian later joins as his sidekick, Hops McElhaney, the alcoholic dog, and the two become a successful marketing duo, until Brian's ego ruins everything and Peter shoots his parade balloon with a sniper rifle, but that's getting away from Angela's death. What's remarkable about this episode is how Angela's death serves absolutely no emotional or narrative purpose beyond creating a job opening. She's been a recurring character since season 4, appearing in dozens of episodes as Peter's boss. She's been involved in major storylines, including sexually harassing Peter, dealing with her own loneliness, and managing the brewery through various crises. But her death gets reduced to a throwaway gag about an urban legend that every child knows is false. The show doesn't explore whether anyone misses her, whether she had family, or whether anyone else finds it suspicious that she died from something that doesn't actually kill people. The swimming after eating death is particularly absurd because it's one of those myths that everyone knows is fake by the time they're teenagers. Parents tell kids to wait 30 minutes after eating before swimming to avoid dealing with cranky children who just want to get back in the pool immediately after lunch. The worst that can happen is maybe some stomach cramps if you swim really vigorously after a huge meal. But Angela apparently died from it, and nobody in the Family Guy universe questions this. Peter presents it as a cautionary tale at her funeral, warning children to listen to their mothers about this very real danger, even though medical professionals have repeatedly debunked this myth. The show essentially kills off a semi-major character with a joke that wouldn't fool a middle schooler. Angela survived years of working at a brewery, dealing with Peter's incompetence, and managing a business in Quahog's chaotic environment, only to die because she went swimming 25 minutes after eating, instead of waiting the full 30. The episode doesn't even show us the incident. We only have Peter's word for it, delivered at the wrong funeral to people who don't know who Angela Island. The long-term impact of Angela's death on the show is minimal. She's replaced by 2 new characters who are themselves basically joke characters. Their main characteristic is being an interracial couple who speak in an annoying, alternating pattern. The brewery continues operating. Peter's work life actually gets worse, and nobody ever mentions Angela again. Her death doesn't lead to any character development, emotional moments, or even particularly funny jokes beyond the initial absurdity of the swimming myth. This reflects Family Guy's broader approach to death and continuity. Sometimes deaths matter and get emotional treatment, like Brian's temporary death that had fans genuinely upset. But more often, characters die for quick gags and are immediately forgotten. Angela drowning in a pool because she ate first gets the same weight as any other throwaway joke. Peter can't even be bothered to go to the right funeral. He delivers her eulogy to strangers and then just leaves when he realizes his mistake. The episode title, Saturated Fat Guy, doesn't even reference Angela's death. The show moves on to Peter becoming a mascot and dealing with Brian's ego, completely forgetting that a woman who was part of Peter's daily life for over a decade just died from violating a fake swimming rule. There's no memorial at the brewery, no collection for her family, no reflection on their complicated relationship. Just a quick joke about a myth everyone knows is false, delivered at the wrong funeral, before moving on to penis jokes and beer mascots. Angela deserved better than dying from an old wives' tale, but in the Family Guy universe, that's actually a pretty dignified exit compared to some alternatives. At least she died doing what she loved, even if what she loved was apparently swimming dangerously soon after meals, like some kind of aquatic rebel who refused to let Big Mom tell her when she could and couldn't enter the pool. We're looking at Season 17, Episode 1 of Family Guy, Married with Cancer, where the show addresses the real-life death of Adam West, who voiced Mayor West for over 100 episodes. The episode deals with the town mourning his passing and ultimately renaming James Woods High School in his honor. Mayor Adam West's death brings genuine grief to Quahog, leading Brian to successfully campaign for renaming James Woods High School to Adam West High School. The episode treats West's passing with unusual sincerity for Family Guy, acknowledging both the character's importance to the show and the real actor's death in 2017. The episode opens with Carol, Lois's sister, and Mayor West's widow, visiting the Griffin family for dinner. She's clearly struggling with grief, telling them she's been having a hard time since Adam passed away. The show even includes a live studio audience track for this episode, with one audience member helpfully explaining that Carol was married to Mayor West, but now he's dead. Another guy in the audience starts shouting inappropriate things about Carol until security removes him. setting the tone that even in mourning, Family Guy will maintain its chaotic energy. Chris is shocked to learn Uncle Adam is dead, and Stewie makes a meta joke, asking how many people the show has killed at this point. Carol wishes there was some way to honor Adam's memory in town, which gives Brian an idea. He suggests renaming James Woods High School after Mayor West, arguing that James Woods has become an embarrassment to Quahog as a political troll and maniac on Twitter. Meanwhile, Peter decides to make a video tribute to Mayor West, set to Richard Marx's Right Here Waiting, because apparently that's how Peter processes grief, through early 90s soft rock ballads. Brian meets with Principal Shepard to discuss renaming the school. The meeting takes a weird turn when Shepard seems to have a gambling problem, watching a game on his phone and panicking about point spreads. He charges Brian a .50 principal meeting fee, and someone named Eddie Payups shows up looking for him. Despite these red flags, Shepard agrees to the name change, probably because, as he points out, Brian is a talking dog who probably knows what he's doing. The show throws in a random cutaway where Peter tells an improv team they're all 35 years old and should go home to their children, because even in episodes about death, Family Guy needs its non sequiturs. The ceremony to unveil the new school name begins with a traditional 40-cat launcher salute to honor their wacky but beloved mayor. They literally launch cats into the air with some kind of catapult, and the cats yowl as they fly through the sky. HGTV's Chip and Joanna Gaines are brought in to reveal the new sign, taking shots at each other about their marriage while wheeling out the new Adam West High sign. The crowd cheers, refreshments are served in the gymnasium, and for a brief moment, everything seems appropriately respectful. Then James Woods himself crashes the ceremony. He appears dramatically with heroic orchestral music playing, clearly not happy about losing his school naming rights. The show doesn't dwell on this confrontation, but Woods' appearance sets up the episode's B-plot, where Brian decides to run for mayor after Carol suggests he'd be perfect for the position, seeing a lot of Adam in him. This leads to Brian and Quagmire both running for mayor, getting on a campaign bus driven by someone named Frank, who Brian calls Gugardo repeatedly after he dies, and eventually going over a cliff together. The immediate aftermath of the school renaming is that Brian gets a taste for politics and civic leadership. Carol thanks him for honoring Adam's memory and tells him he showed real leadership. She sees similarities between Brian and her late husband, though Brian immediately assumes this means they're going to kiss, which they don't. The town seems genuinely moved by the gesture of renaming the school, though the focus quickly shifts to Brian's mayoral ambitions and his rivalry with Quagmire. The long-term impact of Mayor West's death on the show is significant but handled with surprising restraint. Adam West had been voicing the character since 2000, appearing in over 100 episodes as Quahog's bizarre but beloved mayor. His real-life death in June 2017 meant the show had to address losing not just a character, but a piece of Family Guy history. The renaming of the school serves as a permanent in-universe memorial, and the show includes a tribute at the end with the real Adam West asking viewers to vote for him as mayor of their own towns, followed by him saying, "It'll be a home run twice," because he flubbed the first take. What's remarkable is how Family Guy balances genuine emotion with its trademark absurdity. The 40-cat launcher salute is ridiculous, but it feels appropriate for honoring a mayor who once tried to dig for gold under the city and regularly had conversations with his own plants. The show acknowledges that West was legitimately important to the community while maintaining that he was also completely insane. Carol's grief is real, the town's desire to honor him is sincere, but they're still launching cats and dealing with Principal Shepard's gambling addiction during the ceremony. The episode also takes shots at James Woods, using West's death as an opportunity to remove Woods' name from the high school. Brian points out that Woods has become a political troll and embarrassment on Twitter, which reflects real criticism of the actor's controversial online presence. The show essentially uses one celebrity death to take a swing at another celebrity who's very much alive, which is peak Family Guy irreverence. The political subplot with Brian and Quagmire running for mayor feels like the show's way of dealing with the practical question of who replaces Mayor West. Rather than immediately installing a new wacky mayor, they explore what happens when the position is vacant. Brian's motivation, tutivation, he heard Mayor West went to 52 pancake breakfasts a year and wants those free pancakes, is quintessentially stupid, but also weirdly touching. Even in death, West's legacy is measured in breakfast foods and community events. The episode ends without resolving who becomes the new mayor, instead asking viewers to vote online for Quahog's next leader. The show breaks the fourth wall to warn that it's just a trick to track viewer data, maintaining Family Guy's cynical edge even while mourning a beloved character. The final image of Adam West from his mayoral campaign, saying, "It'll be a home run," and messing up the take, serves as a perfect encapsulation of his role on the show. Professional enough to do the job, but human enough to make mistakes. Weird enough to be memorable, but sincere enough to be missed. We're looking at Season 5, Episode 1 of Family Guy, Stewie Loves Lois, where Peter Griffin sues his doctor for sexual assault after completely misunderstanding what a prostate exam island. The episode shows Peter successfully getting Dr. Hartman's medical license revoked through a lawsuit based on his inability to understand basic medical procedures. Peter Griffin mistakes a routine prostate exam for sexual assault and sues Dr. Hartman, successfully getting the doctor's medical license revoked. The case succeeds because Peter dramatically misrepresents the exam in court, turning a standard medical procedure into something sinister through his ignorance and the judge's gullibility. The episode starts with Quahog experiencing a flu epidemic and a shortage of flu shots. Peter goes to get vaccinated but gets turned away because the shots are being saved for the elderly. In typical Peter fashion, he tricks the nurse by pretending to fall. Then, while the needle is accidentally in his arm, he tells her to push the plunger. After getting his flu shot through deception, the nurse notices on his chart that he's 42 years old and has never had a prostate exam. She sends him to Dr. Hartman, who tells Peter he needs to drop his pants, turn around, and lean forward for the exam. Peter has no idea what's coming. When Dr. Hartman performs the standard digital rectal exam, Peter completely freaks out. He screams, "What the hell was that?" And when Hartman explains it's a prostate exam, Peter yells, "Shut up! You had your finger in my ass." The doctor tries to explain that's how the exam is performed, but Peter runs away in horror, convinced he's been violated. He goes home and tells his family he was raped, refusing to accept Lois's explanation that what happened was just a normal prostate exam that men his age need. Peter's trauma response becomes increasingly dramatic. He watches TV and reacts badly to anything involving fingers. Even the Yellow Pages commercial telling people to let your fingers do the walking sets him off. He starts wearing heavy makeup and calling himself a whore while looking in the mirror, experiencing what he believes is genuine trauma from the medical procedure. The situation escalates when Peter meets up with his friends at the Clam, where Cleveland, Joe, and Quagmire all reveal they've also had the traumatic experience of prostate exams from Dr. Hartman. They band together and decide to sue the doctor, with Peter declaring he won't turn a brown eye to this injustice. The trial becomes a complete farce. Peter testifies that he went in for a simple flu shot and trusted Dr. Hartman because he seemed nice and handsome. He describes how the doctor told him to bend over and kept saying, "Relax, I'm a doctor," while performing the exam. Dr. Hartman tries to defend himself, pointing out to the judge that this is ridiculous and that he's even given the judge himself a prostate exam. The judge initially remembers it as a standard exam, but Peter manipulates him by asking if he's sure it wasn't evil and grainy and black and white. The show then presents a flashback in a sinister filter with Dr. Hartman saying, "Relax, I be a doctor," in a creepy voice, which somehow convinces the judge to find Hartman guilty and revoke his medical license. The immediate aftermath shows Peter celebrating with his friends at the Clam, having received money for pain and suffering, which he spent on collagen injections for his lips. He parades around with his new sexy lips, forcing Lois to deal with his bizarre appearance. But the victory is short-lived when Peter starts experiencing frequent urination. The guys at the bar point out that this could mean he has prostate problems that actually need medical attention. The irony hits hard. Peter destroyed the career of the one doctor who could have helped him with a real medical issue he's now developing. Peter tries to find another doctor, but word has spread about his lawsuit. He visits Dr. McCoy from Star Trek, who refuses to see him, saying, "What? So you can sue me too? I'm a doctor, not a patsy." Desperate and with nowhere else to turn, Peter has to humble himself and secretly approach Dr. Hartman for help. He dresses up as a delivery person and tricks Hartman into examining him by putting his prostate in a package and asking the doctor to reach in. When Hartman performs the exam, he discovers Peter actually does have prostate swelling and blockage. Upon clearing the blockage, Hartman pulls out the judge, who emerges from Peter's rectum and immediately reinstates Hartman's medical license, saying the whole thing was ridiculous. The long-term implications of this episode are troubling when you think about them. Peter's complete ignorance about basic medical care for men his age led him to destroy a doctor's career temporarily. The legal system is portrayed as so broken that a patient can successfully sue a doctor for performing a necessary medical procedure just by being dramatic enough in court. The episode essentially mocks men who are uncomfortable with prostate exams, while also suggesting that medical professionals are vulnerable to frivolous lawsuits from ignorant patients. The show treats male discomfort with prostate exams as comedy gold, but there's something darker underneath. Peter and his friend's reaction represents how many men genuinely avoid necessary medical care because of discomfort or embarrassment about these procedures. The episode exaggerates this to an absurd degree, but the core issue, men avoiding prostate exams and potentially missing early cancer detection, is a real public health problem. By having Peter successfully sue his doctor for doing his job, the show creates a scenario where medical professionals might hesitate to perform necessary but uncomfortable procedures. What makes this episode particularly controversial is how it handles the concept of consent and medical procedures. Peter genuinely believes he was assaulted because he didn't understand what a prostate exam entailed. While the show plays this for laughs, it touches on real issues about informed consent in medical settings. Doctors need to explain procedures before performing them, but the episode suggests Dr. Hartman did follow proper protocol. Yes, Peter. Peter just refused to listen or understand. The resolution with the judge emerging from Peter's rectum is pure Family Guy absurdity, but it serves to instantly undo all the damage from the lawsuit. Dr. Hartman gets his license back, but we never see him receive any compensation for the time his practice was shut down or the damage to his reputation. The episode ends with Hartman making a joke about how he was actually going to rape Peter, but he ran out of the room, which is played for laughs but adds another layer of darkness to the whole situation. The episode also includes a B-plot about Stewie becoming overly attached to Lois after she fixes his teddy bear Rupert, leading to him becoming clingy and demanding constant attention. This storyline parallels Peter's journey in an interesting way. Both involve misunderstanding the nature of care, whether medical or maternal. Just as Peter misinterprets medical care as assault, Stewie misinterprets one act of kindness as meaning Lois should devote herself entirely to him. This episode remains one of Family Guy's most controversial medical storylines because it makes light of both sexual assault claims and necessary medical procedures. It shows how ignorance, combined with the legal system, can destroy careers, but plays it all for comedy without really addressing the serious implications. Dr. Hartman losing his license is treated as just another wacky adventure, rather than a serious injustice that could have cost lives if patients couldn't receive medical care. We're looking at Season 14, Episode 18 of Family Guy, The New Adventures of Old Tom, where veteran news anchor Tom Tucker faces professional obsolescence and contemplates suicide after being replaced by a younger, more attractive colleague. The episode shows Tom's desperate attempts to stay relevant, his subsequent firing, and his near-fatal jump from a building. Tom Tucker, Channel 5's longtime news anchor, loses his job to Dallas Portland, a younger and more attractive journalist who captures the audience's attention. After following Peter's terrible advice to act younger on air, Tom gets fired and attempts suicide by jumping from a roof, only to accidentally fall onto bystanders below while trying to save Peter. The episode begins with Peter getting lost at the mall after his family leaves him behind for playing video games too long. Meanwhile, the women of Quahog, including Lois, Bonnie, and others, become obsessed with the new Channel 5 reporter, Dallas Portland. They gather at each other's houses specifically to watch him on TV, commenting on his looks, his humor, and the bulge in his shorts. Peter notices Lois's infatuation and feels threatened by this new presence in their lives. The women treat Dallas like entertainment, drinking wine and smoking joints while watching him do yoga segments above a Petco. Tom Tucker finds himself at the Drunken Clam, drowning his sorrows about Dallas Portland's arrival at the station. He reveals to Peter that the ratings have skyrocketed since Dallas joined, and the network is grooming him to take over. Tom sees the writing on the wall, there's waste the rife. He's being pushed out for someone younger and more appealing to viewers. Peter, angry that his wife is obsessed with Dallas, teams up with Tom to solve both their problems. Peter convinces Tom that the solution is to make himself appear younger and hipper to compete with Dallas. Tom, desperate to save his career, agrees to follow Peter's guidance despite the obvious risks of taking advice from someone who just got lost in a mall. Peter's makeover plan for Tom involves creating a GoPro skateboarding video set to the Beastie Boys' Sabotage. The video goes horribly wrong when Peter crashes into various obstacles and gets attacked by a bear, ending up on Latvia's prank show, Bear Scares. Despite the failure, Peter remains convinced Tom needs to act younger on air. He coaches Tom to adopt youth slang and behave like someone decades younger, promising this will save his career and make Dallas Portland obsolete. Tom practices calling himself T-Homie and using phrases Peter insists young people say. The main event occurs during Tom's newscast, when he attempts to implement Peter's advice. Tom appears on air calling himself T-Homie and tries to deliver news in your mouth. He announces tragic drownings at a pediatric unit and follows it with news bomb while laughing inappropriately. He calls Dallas Grandma and attempts to tattoo Coachella on the bridge of his nose during the broadcast. The tattoo gun slips and injures his eye, causing him to scream in pain on live television. Dallas Portland immediately announces breaking news that Tom Tucker has been relieved of his duties, effective immediately. The firing happens in real time, broadcast to all of Quahog, making Tom's humiliation complete and public. The immediate aftermath shows Tom spiraling into despair. When Peter visits to apologize, Tom tells him he's washed up and was born to be a newsman. Now, he can't do anything else. He compares himself to Billy Zane, convinced his career is permanently over. The situation becomes critical when Tom appears on a mall rooftop, preparing to jump. Police arrive with sirens wailing, and Dallas Portland shows up with a camera crew, seeing an opportunity for a dramatic news story about a crazed jumper. Dallas asks Tom to hand him the microphone before jumping, wanting to capture the torch-passing moment for his career advancement. Peter rushes to the scene and creates a diversion by claiming he's the actual jumper, not Tom. He tells Dallas that Tom was trying to talk him down, giving Tom the opportunity to report on the story. Tom immediately shifts into professional mode, conducting an interview with Peter on the ledge. Peter explains he's doing this because he ruined someone's life and feels terrible about it. Tom, not knowing Peter is referring to him, tells him whoever this person is surely appreciates the gesture and asks him to come down from the ledge. As they prepare to leave together, a pigeon startles them both. Tom loses his balance and falls off the building, landing on several pedestrians below. Peter notes casually that Tom is fine because he landed on people, showing the show's characteristic disregard for collateral damage. The fall appears severe enough to cause serious injury to Tom and the people he lands on, though the show treats this as comedy rather than tragedy. The long-term consequences prove surprisingly positive for Tom. His rooftop interview with Peter generated massive ratings, convincing Channel 5 to reinstate him as anchor. The network realizes that despite his age and recent embarrassment, Tom still commands viewer attention during dramatic moments. Dallas Portland remains at the station but no longer threatens Tom's position. The episode ends with the status quo restored. Tom back at his anchor desk, Peter having helped fix the problem he created, and Lois no longer obsessed with Dallas Portland. The episode explores themes of aging in the workplace and the superficiality of television news. Tom's suicide attempt reflects real anxieties about professional obsolescence and identity crisis. The show presents suicide as a response to career failure, though Tom's fall onto innocent bystanders turns the serious moment into absurdist humor. His survival and career resurrection suggest that experience sometimes triumphs over youth and attractiveness, at least in local news. The relationship between Peter and Tom evolves from mutual problem-solving to genuine concern. Peter's guilt over causing Tom's firing drives him to risk his own safety to help Tom reclaim his career. Their partnership, born from petty jealousy over Dallas Portland, becomes something more meaningful when Tom's life is at stake. Peter's terrible advice nearly destroys Tom, but his willingness to take responsibility ultimately saves him. The episode satirizes television news culture, where appearance matters more than journalism skills. Dallas Portland represents the modern trend of hiring attractive personalities over experienced journalists. Tom's desperate attempts to seem young highlight the pressure older workers face in image-conscious industries. His T-homie persona shows how badly someone can misjudge youth culture when trying too hard to fit in. The women's obsession with Dallas Portland provides commentary on objectification and media consumption. They gather specifically to gawk at him, making comments about his body while their husbands feel threatened. The show reverses typical gender dynamics, having women openly lust after a male news anchor, while their partners deal with jealousy and insecurity. Tom's statement that he was born to be a newsman reflects how people define themselves through their careers. Losing his job means losing his identity, making suicide seem like the only option. Even facing death, he can't escape his professional persona, delivering his suicide note in news format. The resolution, where Tom regains his position through the very crisis that nearly killed him, suggests that authentic dramatic moments still matter in news. While Dallas Portland represents manufactured appeal, Tom's genuine reporting during a crisis proves his worth. The ratings spike from his rooftop interview demonstrates that viewers value real journalism during serious events, even if they prefer eye candy during regular broadcasts. The episode ultimately argues that experience and authenticity have value even in youth-obsessed industries. Tom's failed attempts to act young make him look ridiculous, but his professional skills during the rooftop crisis remind everyone why he became an anchor. His near-death experience, caused by trying to be something he's not, ironically returns him to being exactly who he always was. Olly Williams, Quahog's beloved Black-U-Weather forecaster, known for his loud, brief weather reports, faces personal disaster when the very hurricane he's warning viewers about destroys his own home. During one of Family Guy's most ironic moments, Olly continues reporting even as his house gets obliterated behind him. The episode takes place during one of Quahog's severe weather events, with Channel 5 News providing continuous coverage. Olly Williams has been the station's go-to weather reporter for years, famous for his extremely loud and concise reports like, "It's gone rain," or "Everybody look like ants." His segments typically last 3 seconds, delivering maximum information with minimum words at maximum volume. Tom Tucker regularly throws to Olly for weather updates, and viewers have come to expect his unique reporting style. As the storm intensifies, the news team decides Olly should report from the field to show viewers the hurricane's real impact. Olly sets up outside his own house, which seems like a practical choice. He knows the neighborhood, has easy access, and can demonstrate the storm's effects on residential areas. What nobody anticipates is that Olly's house will become the story itself. The winds pick up throughout his live shots, with debris flying past and rain coming down sideways. During his live report, Olly stands in front of his house shouting, "It's raining sideways," at the camera. Behind him, his roof starts peeling off like a sardine can. Shingles fly through the air, windows explode inward, and his car flips over in the driveway. Olly continues reporting, seemingly unaware or simply too professional to acknowledge that his entire life is being destroyed in real time on television. His fence posts turn into projectiles, his mailbox launches into orbit, and his front door tears off its hinges and disappears into the storm. The culmination comes when Olly yells, "Sounds like poop!" his analysis of the storm's audio qualities, just as his entire house collapses behind him. The structure doesn't just fall, it implodes, explodes, and somehow manages to sink into the ground simultaneously. His possessions scatter across 3 counties. His family photos become part of the stratosphere, and his collection of umbrellas, ironically, gets shredded by the rain. Through it all, Olly maintains his professional composure, never breaking character or acknowledging the personal catastrophe unfolding behind him. Back in the studio, Tom Tucker watches this unfold with his typical detachment. He thanks Olly for the report and immediately moves on to other news without mentioning that their colleague just became homeless on live television. Diane Simmons makes a brief sympathetic face before returning to her professional smile. The show treats this as just another day in local news, where personal tragedy becomes public entertainment, and nobody stops to consider the human cost. The long-term impact on Olly's life never gets properly addressed by the show. In subsequent episodes, he appears back at his job, still shouting weather reports, with no explanation of where he lives now or how he recovered from losing everything. The show's reset button means Olly's house presumably gets rebuilt off-screen, or maybe he just finds a new one, or perhaps he lives at the station now. Family Guy never tells us. His financial situation, insurance claims, temporary housing, and emotional trauma all get ignored because addressing them would mean acknowledging consequences in a show that thrives on avoiding them. This moment represents Family Guy at its most casually cruel, using a character's genuine disaster as a throwaway visual gag. Olly Williams, one of the few stable, employed, professional characters in Quahog, loses everything he owns while doing his job, and nobody cares. The show plays this for comedy. The professional weatherman, getting destroyed by weather, while reporting on weather, creates ironic humor. But underneath that joke lies something darker about how news media treats human suffering as content, even when it's their own people suffering. The episode also comments on the dedication of journalists who report from dangerous situations. Olly could have evacuated, could have reported from the studio, could have protected his property. Instead, he stands in harm's way to inform the public and gets rewarded by losing everything. His commitment to his job literally costs him his home, and the news cycle moves on without pause. Tom Tucker's immediate transition to the next story shows how quickly media forgets individual tragedy in pursuit of the next headline. Olly's character never changes after this incident. He remains the loud, brief weather guy, seemingly unaffected by his loss. This could be read as resilience, or as Family Guy's inability to let characters grow from traumatic experiences. Either way, Olly Williams continues appearing in episodes, shouting about weather, living somewhere, owning things again, as if the hurricane never happened. The show's commitment to status quo means even losing everything doesn't warrant character development. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video about every time you felt bad for Peter Griffin.